Hey, it's Wednesday evening. Welcome to the Hang Up. I'm at Dillahunty. I didn't even, has the little logo, it hasn't always spun around like that. That's something new. Uh, that's weird that the clock timer spins. How's everybody doing? We've been doing great here. We think that our last clutch of Python eggs for the year have hatched now. It is a set of 6 albinos, and half of them are also yellow belly. More on that another time. We got lots of stuff to get to today. First of all, hi, I'm Matt. This is the Hang Up. I'm an asshole. I've just been informed of that for the, 10 millionth time on Twitter. And I am. But that doesn't mean that every accusation of me being an asshole is necessarily justified. Someone suggested they've seen a bunch of tweets from me where I seem to be, in their mind, calling out atheists for not being atheist enough. So let me start off with that. Morgan says it wasn't spinning. Thank you. I don't call people out for not being atheist enough. I don't even know what that means. As a matter of fact, I've talked about this a gazillion times. You're either an atheist or you're not. You're either convinced there's a God or you're not. You're either not convinced or you are. That's it. There's no way to be a bad atheist except to believe in a God. And there are, though, ways to do harm and cause problems for the various movements with regard to secularism, church-state separation, et cetera. So I will call people out for not being skeptical enough, for not being honest enough, for not being rational enough, for not being compassionate enough. But you're either atheist or you're not. And anybody who thinks that I'm calling people out, you're not atheist enough, or even implying that they're not atheist enough, that's something that happened in your head because of some misunderstanding. Or maybe it's a failure on my part to communicate. You can call in and fix it if you want. I'll call out people for being sloppy thinkers or crappy at arguing because that makes my job harder. Sorry. This isn't just a pastime for me. I spent the last 18 years focused on these issues, both focused on atheist normalcy, secular humanism, and all of these things. And it's important that we do a better job of arguing. I don't always get it right. I'm not going to. Like I said, I can be an asshole. The thing is, I called out someone today. I have no idea if they're an atheist or not, but they are dishonest as fuck. They post YouTube videos and have over 300,000 subscribers. And their videos have just the most amazing clickbait titles. Like, for example, today they posted a video saying that the fraud trial was over and Trump Jr. was found guilty. That's not true. That is not even in the ballpark of true. We had one day of testimony. That was it. There's more days of testimony coming up for the Trumps. Hey, when I went to check, this same individual had a clip that said Sidney Powell found dead at home, foul play suspected. And the video really had nothing to do with that because that's not fucking true either. Now, I'm an equal opportunity caller outer. As a matter of fact, I'm more likely to call out atheists with bad arguments and leftists with bad arguments, those who are essentially, if what you posted is something that the right or the religious would post to parody us and do harm to the movement that we're working on or the various movements we're working on, I'm going to call that out. And if you want to go on social media and announce things to the world, be prepared to defend what you say. That's part of this open marketplace. You can block, you can say you don't owe anybody an explanation, but if you're going to call somebody out for something, be prepared to defend your accusation. If you say there's a whole bunch of tweets of me doing something, you should be able to produce one. But I'm right here taking calls several times a week. You can also call in and address that. We take calls all the time. There was somebody who called in to say that I argued dishonestly, and I ended up making an entire video about it. If you want to support clickbait, go ahead, but you'll just get more clickbait. If you want to support lies, you'll just get more of that. If you side with people who think that accountability is canceling, then you're going to enable them. If you side with people who, when asked to defend their position, claim that you're mistreating them or that you're willing to attack your own side, I only have one side, and that's the truth. I only have one side, and that is a better world. I get it. I just gave 2 different one sides. But the thing is, I don't view people in that sense, and I'd much rather address ideas. Tonight, though, I've got Dr. Aron Adair, physicist extraordinaire, on the Hang Up for the first time. And I have lots of questions. I'm sure you guys have lots of questions. Dr. Adair is a physicist and a Bible scholar And as somebody, I ran around. I'll have questions related to stuff that I've heard from Lawrence Krauss when we were touring around about a universe from nothing and entropy and which topics are most difficult for people. But I, I'm going to let Dr. Adair say hello, and then shockingly, we're going straight to a call, and then we'll get back into discussion. So, how you doing? I'm happy to have you here.
Good. Hello, and good to be here. Thanks for having me on. And well, I will nowhere claim I'm as accomplished as Dr. Krauss. I'll hopefully not muck up too much physics tonight.
And maybe you won't grope people. I'm sorry. You're way over there. Anyway, yeah, I have questions or anything else.
Put me in a padded room. The chances of me screwing up in that particular way has been minimized.
But you also had mentioned that you just wrote a book related to UFOs and God.
Yeah, I co-wrote
How are we
the
not
following
promoting that
book,
already?
Aliens. Yes. We've been promoting this hard and as much as possible. But yeah, co-wrote this with my friend Jonathan M.S. Pierce, who has been doing lots of amazing philosophical work. And last year, we basically started diving into some of the attempts by Christians to say, yeah, there's not going to be any actual issue with extraterrestrials and especially Catholic theology. That was the original article we looked at. We found problems, and then we realized there's a whole book here. And since I also had previous experience hunting aliens, I had a summer internship at the SETI Institute, physics background, so I can do the numbers. And so book is like half chances that there's life out there and what we might expect to find. And here are all the implications that could happen if aliens do actually exist, and all the theological heavy lifting that'll need to be done if you want to keep up with the science.
Awesome. Well, hold your book up again, and we'll make sure that we get a link out to your stuff as well. There we go. Aliens and Religion, where two worlds collide. But we already have callers, and
All right.
I want to start with, we have theist callers right off the bat. So Bob's calling in from California, pronouns are he, him. Bob claims to have proof of God. Bob, you're on with Dr. Adair and me. How are you?
Hey, what's up, boys?
Howdy.
We're just doing a show. What are you doing?
Nothing. How you guys doing? Real quick, Matt, I just had a quick question before I started.
Okay.
Can you hear? Okay. Do you, and I mean this all sincerity, do you consider yourself straight?
What is it? Why is that relevant to anything?
Because I'm just, in my own life, I'm having doubts. Because I know you date a trans girl, right?
How would whether or not I consider myself straight have any impact on you?
Well, I'm just asking. I'm just asking.
And I'm just asking a question in return. How would it be relevant to you?
Because it would help me figure out maybe how I feel.
Yeah, but why would how somebody else
feel have
any impact on how you feel? Are you attracted to men or women or all or both or none or whatever? That's how you define whether or not you're straight, gay, bi, trans, asexual, or sorry, not trans, straight, gay, bi, pan, asexual, whatever. What does this have to do with proof of God?
No, I just wanted to ask that.
Cool. I don't think it's any of your fucking business.
All right, that's cool, man. Appreciate it.
What do you got for us?
What's that?
Are you going to present proof of God, or was this your only reason?
No, I just wanted to ask that.
So when the call screener asked what you were calling about, you said you had proof of God. And so that was a lie so that you could ask me whether or not I consider myself straight. Yeah, you're a garbage human being. I'm banning you from the shows right now.
So
Take
are you, buddy.
down the number.
Yeah, cool.
Goodbye, jackass.
So are you, dude.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Dr. Adair, how are you doing? Because my day's just going great.
I have to say, I wasn't expecting the hang up to happen that fast, but hey, the show lives up to the name. We're good.
It absolutely does. When people lie, and what's funny is you don't have to lie to the call screeners. I mean, you did get to be the first caller and you interrupted a potential discussion about physics with my guest and myself because I was excited that we had a theist calling in to say that they had proof of God. But really, they were completely inept in their trolling because they wanted to ask a question that's completely irrelevant, that's none of their business, that has nothing to do with any of this. And then they couldn't even pay it off. This was a prank type call that they couldn't pay off because they're dumber than a sack of hammers and they don't even know how to properly troll somebody. Anyway, let's rewind. So you've got this great book. We had a caller. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to take that caller who's called in before to say that they're, the UFO the recent UFO testimony from the whistleblower, they accepted that. And today they were calling in supposedly with proof of God, but they failed. What did you think about the whistleblower's testimony with regard to aliens?
Well, the thing is, to be a whistleblower, you have to have actual information or facts. And the person here, his name was Michael Grush, had been part of various intelligence apparatus within the U.S. government, and all he basically brought was a bunch of hearsay. And the thing that I would say, there's a couple of things that hurt his credibility in these claims. One is that multiple times he has been asked to come in and give more information in a more classified setting, like in a skiff room or things like that. And he continues to find some excuse why not to do that, including somebody has to pay for his room and board to come and do it. It's apparently just, I got all these amazing secrets, I can't tell you about it, and just won't make the effort to actually tell apparently all this earth-shattering news in the environment that he says is necessary to do. But perhaps more importantly is the things he does claim, some of those things we can actually go and check and see how good of an investigator he is. And among the things that tip me off that he is more the true believer rather than a skeptical investigator is that he completely buys into the Roswell crash being aliens and thinks the entirety of the U.S. Air Force report back from the 90s was just a complete PSYOP operation. So ultimately, the more outlandish claims that have almost no evidential backing, he does believe. The government reporting, and literally I say government reporting, literally it was a 1,000-page report from the U.S. Air Force, just says, nope, just dismisses the whole thing. And conversely, believes on the worst sort of hearsay that the Italians actually had a UFO land in Italy back in the 1930s, and it was retrieved by the U.S. Army back in 1944 with the help of the Vatican. I was able to actually find what is the source of that information, and it was another ufologist in Italy, and basically the documents he shows are doubly anonymous. He doesn't know who sent it to him, and the person who sent it says, I got this from a family member who used to work in this organization. So it's like, okay, we don't know who's sending it, and it's someone's anonymous family member. All right, that's pretty weak tea evidence. And it's basically a couple of old telegrams, and I had to do some digging because no one else did it. Are the telegrams at least authentic? And I actually wrote this up for a website, if you're familiar with Only Sky, the newer blogging website.
Yep.
Yeah. I produced an article that basically was going through the rundown of the claims there, and also this Italian UFO report, and I show the evidence why the telegrams are probably late 20th century fakes. So the evidence that he says shows that the Italians have had UFOs and were somehow retrieved by the U.S. government is all based on doubly anonymous sources that look more likely fake than real. And that is how he's going to blow the lid off all the CIA operations. It's like, come on, we need better game than this. Be like Edward Snowden and show us the documents.
Yeah, it's every time there's a phrase from Animal House, the movie, where you're on double secret probation, and that is what registers in my head every time I hear one of these. Oh, this has been debunked, or it's anonymous, but it's anonymous to the where we don't even know who it's anonymously from in the wow, blah 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 blah. Professional speaker. We don't even know who is providing either the secondary source for this, let alone the primary. And yet these individuals, I get it. It's something that we, the public, generally are fascinated with. I'm less fascinated. I had my period of when I was a kid where, it was watch all the weird stuff, the cryptozoology stuff, the pyramid stuff, Bermuda Triangle and aliens and Bigfoot and all this, and went through all this. And it wasn't that I ever reached a point where I said all of that is nonsense, because I was a skeptic. You don't get to the, oh, that's bullshit. I mean, if there's something's debunked, it's debunked, but that's not what skepticism is about. Skepticism is about attempting to confirm and either confirming it or failing to. And so I can't tell you whether or not there's aliens. I haven't seen any good reason to believe that aliens have visited Earth. I think that things like the Drake equation and things like that suggest that it would be incredibly unlikely that we might be the only living things in the entire history of this immense universe. But whether or not any other intelligent life at our level, or even the level of, dolphins or whatever, whether that exists somewhere else, or whether it used to exist and they, ended themselves with climate change or nuclear war or whatever, I have no way of knowing. And I remember as a kid being asked and asking questions about aliens. And one of the responses I got from, I would say it came from my uncle, but I don't think it's the case. I think it came from a preacher, and it was just one of my family members was talking about it, that alien life presents a potential problem for Christianity, in that Jesus came to Earth and died for the sins of humanity, and sins that started here, supposedly here, if you want to take a literalist view of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve. And therefore, if there were aliens, either they were completely sinless, which means we have nothing to fear from them because they're just good people. They might as well be the angels. Or there's some other explanation that, we don't know. And when I hear that, I'm like, isn't that what we're constantly hearing? Anytime a theologian gets stuck, or an apologist gets stuck in, hey, how would this impact religion? Much like a lawyer, all of a sudden it becomes, we don't know, when 10 minutes beforehand, they seem to know quite a bit about a God that they can't demonstrate. Are we
in this avenue? It's actually even worse than that, because we know what the theologians did think, and now they've just put that down the memory hole. So in particular, this was actually a bit of historical investigation done by an actual historian of science, was looking into the curious case of Giordano Bruno and his execution in 1600. And it's a mistake to say that he was killed because he was a believer in the Copernican solar system. He had a whole bunch of charges against him, and apparently one of them was the plurality of worlds and their inhabitants. So it sounds like, oh, he was killed for aliens. And I have seen many other more modern folks or modern theologians try to say that wasn't really what was going on. That's not good historical evidence, but basically showing like, no, like here is like 1500 years of precedent in both Catholic and Protestant sources up to 1600, all clearly saying believing in the multiplicity of worlds and people living there is a heresy, including St. Augustine. And I have pointed this out to a couple of the people that also have written on the subject, and it's just like, oh, I've never heard that. It's like they thought that there was no such things, and that actually medieval scholars already thought about and realized, yeah, there's no problem here. It's like, no, dig out of the memory hole and you'll see, no, like literally multiple popes, multiple bigwigs in this whole Catholicism thing basically said, no, damnable heresy. No, this person literally was put to death for that. And now it's the 21st century, and it's like, oh, there's probably no issue. 500 years earlier, oh, there's a big issue. So just like you say, they're completely confident about what God thinks and wants and does, but put that in their faces of what had happened. It's like, well, that was just a misunderstanding. It's the same thing with like biblical slavery or anything else like that. All the bad stuff goes down the memory hole, or just says, oh, people just misunderstood it. It's like, well, congrats. You seem to not know what the right answer is until I tell you what it is.
Yeah. It's maybe we'll get to ask some of those questions tonight. I see we got some theists calling in and on the phone here. So let's take another call from George in Florida. Pronouns are he, him, wants to talk about why we should dismiss conspiracy theorists or conspiracy nuts immediately. George, who's saying we should dismiss either a conspiracy theory or the person presenting it immediately?
No, no, Matt. I guess it's just like listening to some things you've spoken of before, where someone will go on a conspiracy line of reasoning, a rabbit hole, I guess. But you just like I've seen you dismiss it offhand, and I kind of like that mentality, and I would love to just be if it's like anyone's getting, I don't know, like a New World Order or Rothschild thing, to just throw it away. And so often I do. But I kind of wonder, like, what's a mentality behind that, and what about when you have, like, I don't know, people in authority with some background authority that do believe, let's say, conspiracies. Like in my own life, I guess I've seen doctors, some doctors be very anti-vax, and so me coming along, that's all like that. I would feel like a jackass just rolling my eyes at that. But I guess I'd like to know it's all like how to make that automatic, and your approach to that.
I don't make it automatic. I think the mistake here, and it may be mine, is that you see me being dismissive of something without really digging into it on the show or entertaining it on the show. And yet you seem to think that I'm dismissing it immediately out of hand, when in fact, I've already spent time considering the claim for many years in many cases. And so I tend to kind of shorthand stuff. Aron, how do you tell, and what would you do if somebody presented like an anti-vax? Well, I'm not even sure anti-vax is a proper conspiracy theory. For me, a conspiracy theory is when you take disparate facts that are true and weave together a narrative that isn't, and yet it's compelling kind of at the surface level. So being anti-vax is just kind of, denying the scientific facts. How do you make a distinction, and where would you go?
In some ways, I think there is actually some difference between an actual conspiracy, the ones that actually exist in reality, because some do, and the conspiracy theory mindset, where do people conspire to do nefarious things? Yes. In fact, you could even just see that happened in an international setting with what Hamas did with attacking Israel. That was literally people conspiring together to do some sort of heinous thing, and apparently did it sneakily enough that Israeli defense forces failed to stop it in time. So do conspiracies like that happen? Yes. There's also all sorts of failed ones, like Nixon's ultimately failed attempt to burgle into the Watergate Hotel undetectedly, and that ultimately causing him the presidency. So those sorts of things do happen, but conspiracy thinking is the idea that somehow there is some sort of like secret code to being able to put it all together, and anything that doesn't fit that is part of the grander conspiracy. The mindset is always some form of motivated reasoning. That, I think, is the point that you have to stop and say, hey, there are many different ways you can interpret any data point, but you are trying to make it point in the least likely direction in many cases, or you're just to the point of just straight up tea leaf reading. Some of the QAnon stuff is literally just looking at like random numbers or words and just trying to figure out, oh, this is somehow encoded, and using gematria or things like that to figure out what the real message is.
Yeah.
So that sort of hyper motivated reasoning is, I think, a hallmark of conspiratorial thinking.
The debate that I did and walked out of this past weekend, the individual I was debating was clearly a conspiracy theorist on a number of different things. And one of the ways to spot this, and I just talked about this in the debate review that I posted live before the show, he walked in claiming that he had evidence for Noah's Ark. And so I prepared for a debate about evidence for Noah's Ark. And I don't know, George, how familiar you are with this, but there have been many times where Christians and Christian air quotes archaeologists have claimed to have discovered Noah's Ark. Mount Ararat is one of the prime locations that people target. They'll look for unusual structures. And of course, it's in a spot where, the government just won't let you go and investigate it. And so that adds to a conspiracy. But this individual went with none of that. Instead, he talked about how rocks were shaped like hearts, and that this was then evidence that the rocks were petrified hearts, which is evidence that these hearts died in the global flood, which is evidence for a global flood, which is evidence for Noah, which is evidence for Noah's Ark. There's a chain from I found a rock that looks like a heart that leads with nothing else substantive to therefore I have evidence for Noah's Ark. I'm not dismissing Noah's Ark when I dismiss that claim. I'm dismissing the epistemology of connecting those dots from found a rock looks like a heart, therefore I have good reason to think that Noah's Ark existed. That is simple. That doesn't matter whether it's a conspiracy theory. It doesn't matter. It's just simply irrational. If he went further to say, hey, there's a conspiracy to hide this information, which is why, Turkey won't let you in to investigate where we saw these other things, and that's why I had to have this information. Okay, now there's an assertion of a conspiracy without evidence to support it. But for just bizarre claims like that, it doesn't even matter if there was a conspiracy theory to it. It's about connecting the dots with evidence. Is there a particular conspiracy theory you're finding yourself frustrated with, George?
Yeah, just general COVID anti-vax things, how people are getting adverse reactions to it, and I guess that I keep on finding that if I want to be skeptical towards anti-vax claims, my karma is that I find doctors and PhDs who hate it, who are also become like anti-vax. And I'm thinking, where are they being professionals? Where can they be conspiracy nuts? And sometimes it's just best to not engage and just listen. But also for myself, I guess, really double my skepticism in an area where I would need to become a doctor to really get back at them. That's actually, and that's not worth it. So am I making sense there?
Yeah. And there's a good point there, George. And I'm definitely glad that we have Dr. Adair here, because I watched Skeptalk a week or so ago when you were on with Gutsick Gibbon. And basically there was an individual who called in talking about their physics paper that they wouldn't present to you. And maybe they have a physics paper, and maybe it's wonderful, and maybe it's peer reviewed, and maybe they're right and you're wrong. I don't know. I'm not a physicist at all. And similarly, I'm not a doctor. And so during COVID, one of the things that I did was we had Dr. Angie come on, and of course, student Dr. Ben as well, but Dr. Angie, who's an emergency room physician, to talk about the vaccine and give people details and all this other stuff. We live in a weird world where, and I talked about this let's not get off onto this subject right now because we're doing good on conspiracy theories, but I have a difficult time finding news sources I trust that will allow me to come up with a robust model of the Israel-Palestine war, slaughter, whatever. And similarly, if I don't have any expertise and if I'm not good at Googling, how do I know which doctors to trust when we're talking about vaccines? How do I know which physicists to trust when we're talking about, when somebody's talking about, is there a universe from nothing? Do you mean the same thing by nothing as a physicist that you do as a philosopher? No. The answer is no. But it doesn't matter how many times somebody says that. How do we figure out what sources to trust for those of us? We can't possibly become experts on everything.
Totally agree there. When it comes to anything medical, the most I'm going to just say is, here's my understanding of what that consensus is. I'm not going to be able to go tit for tat about the production of mRNA vaccines. What tiny bits of things I might know, like how some people will abuse the adverse reaction reports, just because I've seen that happen before. So so George, you probably have heard people cite adverse reactions from the VARS reporting system, I'm guessing?
Yeah, not only that, but I've also a hearsay from friends from his friends and family that didn't do it in the report. Maybe they go to like their own Telegram channels, but that's
Oh yeah, that seems even lower quality. So I'm sticking with the high quality conspiracy of or the higher quality reporting of these adverse effects, so that the VAERS reporting system, people are supposed to be reporting in after they've had a vaccine any adverse reactions, and it's probably better than not that it's there, but people will go to that and say, hey, look at all these people that have these adverse reactions, not realizing you have to contextualize that. What's the chances that people just at random, completely not having the vaccine, will also have that reaction? And that comparison is so often left out. So if people say, I got the flu shot and then I got the flu later, did the flu shot cause that? Well, the best thing to do is take a look at population that did and didn't by comparison, and then you can actually see what's happening there. Many people will just say that anecdotal account or just the reports that people have had that and not done the actual comparison. And again, I don't have medical training, but I understand that this is just a very basic thing of doing any sort of medical check the quality of what's going on there. But again, I can only say this is what tiny bit I do know, but if you want heart surgery, please don't talk to me.
Okay. Now, when it comes to like vaccines, I mean, I actually had like my mom had a little heart episode and a precursor to a stroke immediately after the flu vaccine, and even when she took the COVID vaccine, she had like so knocked out like on that there were two parts to the Moderna vaccine, and then she had like a mini coma, and then the anti-vax things came out. Like my mother is like so sensitive that it's all like if I feel that if there's a 1 in 20,000 people there will happen a certain reaction. It's going to be one of those 1 in 20,000.
I think a couple things to note, George, is first of all, it's good to know some fallacies, although I wouldn't recommend identifying them just by name, because when your mom says, "Oh, I got this vaccine and then I got sick," or I got a flu shot and then I got this, that fallacy is called post hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore because of this, and it's a fallacy because it also happened after you ate breakfast or after you ate dinner or after whatever the last thing you ate was. That could also be it. It also happened after you went outside and interacted with people. And so people want to draw connections because they want to understand things and they want to point to a cause. But we have to do more work to establish what the cause is. And so for the people who are, presenting you with the sort of vaccine denial information, the questions that I would ask them, because I'm going to say, hey, I'm not an expert. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a virologist. Where is this information that you're presenting? Where is this published? Should I take your word? Are you suggesting I should take your word for it? Because that to me seems just as flawed as, someone suggesting I should take Big Pharma's word for it, even though I won't ever say Big Pharma unironically. But to ask them, are you suggesting I should take your word for it? Because that to me seems to be just as problematic as what you're objecting to. Should I trust you? Should I trust the current consensus, the scientific consensus? Should I trust the peer-reviewed research? Should I trust the government agencies? And then get into the how and why not of who you should trust. And then once you've had all the conversations about who you should trust, you can point out maybe I shouldn't be trusting a who at all, and I should be trusting a what, which is the data. And so what do the data show for this thing? Other than that, I mean, I feel your frustration, but apart from saying, hey, I don't know either, how do you ask them? How do you determine who's telling the truth? How do you determine who to listen to? And then, say, well, they'll either convince you to share their sources and share their confidence in their sources, or they'll say something which you will then be able to say, I don't share your confidence in those sources. How can I get there, or should I get there? but yeah, should I take your word for it? It is probably you'll get them to be, oh, no, I'm not saying you should take my word for it. No, this is, and it'll be, this is known, or this is what they don't want you to know. And the second they say something like that, it's like, who is they? And how do you know they don't want me to know this? It's that's how you start chipping away at the conspiracy. You have to ask the questions to get to that. And in the last debate, I tried to ask questions leading to a better understanding of what sort of epistemological path or what sort of evidence-based reliable path they were using to get from this to this. But it devolved into the descendants of Dracula and countless other things just out of the blue. And at some point, you have to realize no matter who's right, the conversation is now moved to a point where it's a waste of everybody's time to continue. If you guys aren't starting on the same page with, hey, we share a reality and we share a way of understanding that reality, I don't know how you can get to agreement or why you'd spend much time trying.
Okay. Well, thanks. I don't have much to add. So,
all right. Thanks, George.
Caller.
Thanks, George.
Bye.
Have a great
Pleasure chatting.
Great Wednesday. It's I know, so I have an online acquaintance that many people are going to be familiar with, and that's Simon Dan. And I did a podcast with Dan and Conspiracy Cats, and those guys deal with flat earthers and all sorts of, conspiracy theorist minded sort of things way more often than I do. I just deal with the religion stuff. And in the video that I put out earlier today, I had to point out why it's different. Why somebody can believe that there was a talking snake in a garden with a magic fruit, and that's still a different category of potential irrationality than having a methodology that leads from, I found a rock that looks like a heart, therefore Noah's Ark was real. That path doesn't exist. The Christians and Jews and anybody else who's accepting what the Bible says, they just accept that the Bible is true. There isn't a methodology there. It is this. I'm convinced this is the word from God, and therefore I'm going to accept it. And we may get calls along those lines, but in your dealings with the overlap between the two realms you deal with the most, physics and Bible things, and theists who are advocating for that, what's the one thing about physics or science, you can go broader if you need to, that you find theists most likely to completely misunderstand, where there's some gross conceptual error that leads to problems that should be resolvable if it weren't for the fact that either we're bad at communicating science or science is just difficult in some cases?
Oh, well, probably most of that energy of where theists will even be pointing at is when it comes to at least physics stuff, is about the origins of the universe. That seems to be where most of the heat is. And so it's either the young earth creationists denying basically every single branch of science where it conflicts with their literal interpretation, or people who will point to Big Bang cosmology and say, see, this is proof of the Bible because our Bible talks about creation from nothing. The Big Bang is a universe popping out from nothing. And therefore, this shows the truth of the Bible. And of course, there's multiple layers of problems with that. One is that the idea of creation from nothing, literal creation from ex nihilo, that isn't in the Old Testament. That's a later philosophical innovation starting in the late 2nd, early 3rd century AD. And because if you go to the Hebrew, and other Hebraists have pointed this out much more eloquently than I can, but basically the terminology used for there, when it starts off, it's using a term to basically say, not like create out of nothing, but to separate things out. So there's already pre-existing stuff that you're dealing with. And in particular, you read Genesis and you say, and then God's Spirit moves across the waters. Well, when did he create that? Apparently they were already always there. And that was the old cosmology. And when I say the old, I mean that's what the Sumerians believe, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Greeks. Stuff popping out from water, basically, is where it all comes from for the longest time. And that gets thrown down the memory hole because now we know modern science, and it's like, well, obviously the Bible says what the modern scientists say. That is where I probably will spend most of my time in physics discussions or otherwise anything else that just messes with the nature of time. The discussion we had a couple weeks ago with Erica about wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, 6 days on Earth or 6 days from some other observer point of view, somehow making Genesis work. All that wonderful stuff that I will call generously nonsense. That's probably where I will spend most of my time. Or I have to spend more time in my original wheelhouse with it, my first book. And yes, I have all my books ready to reach through so I can advertise myself. So first one I wrote was this one about the attempts to explain the Star of Bethlehem, because I used to work in a planetarium, Christmas time. In fact, even now, starting probably this month, planetariums around the country try showing, and here's how we can explain the Christmas story completely with astronomy. When I saw it first time, I was like, oh, wow, this is awesome. I was basically a deist at the time. So I'm like, this is how God would run the universe. And then I found out eventually, the various different scientists who talk about this have different hypotheses. And when you originally go back to the language of the gospel, you realize, okay, the people making all these claims can't read Greek to get themselves out of a paper bag. And they're telling me that this is some exact scientific term and they can't tell the difference literally between nouns and verbs. No, guys, no. Back up. Let's start from the beginning and realize you don't know what you're talking about.
It's funny too, because I've seen things like this before of, hey, how can we find a scientific explanation for the Star of Bethlehem? How can we find a scientific explanation for Jesus walking on water? And for me, the first question is, why would you try to explain something if you have no reason to think that it actually happened? I get, and by the way, if you came up with a scientific explanation for it, it's funny that what you see happen is a bunch of people who don't understand necessarily the science or perhaps the theology either. A portion of them will think that because there's a scientific explanation, this serves as a debunking for the theological claim that it wasn't miraculous, it was just scientific.
Mm.
And another portion of them will think that the scientific thing confirms the event, which makes it more miraculous. And I'm like, why on earth are we trying to come up with an explanation for something when it's going to be a lose-lose and they haven't established that it happened in the first place?
Yeah, and that's actually something that biblical scholars figured out just about 200 years ago. There was this entire movement starting in the late 18th century called rationalism, where, well, we believe in the universe that Newton describes, so there aren't any miracles. All right, we got this book full of miracles. How do we make sense of this? And various attempts to explain every miraculous event in the Bible as some sort of misunderstood natural event. The parting of the waters of the Red Sea for the Exodus story, just a strong wind blowing over marshy ground, and the Hebrew people just walked basically through some slightly muddy marshes. Things like that. How did Jesus walk on water? It was a dark and stormy night, and the disciples were out in the ship, and they had lost their sense of direction and didn't realize they actually had been beached. And so when Jesus came walking to them along the seashore, not realizing that they were no longer in the middle of the sea, they mistook and believed Jesus was walking out on the water. Those sorts of things explaining the biblical miracles over and over again, until eventually enough scholars basically were pointing out, hey, even on the literal interpretation, this doesn't make sense. 2, this makes the authors look like complete idiots. And 3, there's way more cogent explanations if you treat this in more, well, they then had to use the worst 4-letter word in all of religion, myth.
Yeah, faith.
5-letter word, that one is, but the 4-letter word is myth.
Oh crap! I can't count. This is why I don't do physics.
It's all good. It's all good. To be fair, when I found that it was mostly in German scholarship, so it was a 6-letter word in German.
See, maybe it's a 4-letter word in some other language that, of the many languages that I don't speak, that's one of my favorites. Yeah, it's funny that you'll get into. I heard you say it, and the second you said it, the the former Southern Baptist kid in me
Oh,
wanted to be, it's Exodus 14:22, and it says they went across on dry ground, not slightly muddy. It says dry ground. And then I realized, hang on, I'm not quite sure what the Hebrew actually says there that gets translated. And holy crap, we could have an entire, argument and disagreement about, does this fix it? And we're right back to the start, which is, did it happen? And would it matter if it did happen and it was only slightly muddy ground as opposed to dry ground? Wouldn't that still be an amazing miracle of parting the Red Sea?
Yeah.
It's just,
yeah. And of course, like you say, if it's also just storytelling and we're just trying to come up with explanations, are we basically just doing the physics of Spider-Man?
well, we've got some questions coming in about the universe and about Qualia, and somebody wanted to address my critique of the Kalam, but theists are always going to get priority. And once again, we have Theo in Tennessee, pronouns are he, him, who's calling in to tell us that life is better with God than without God. So, hey, Theo, welcome.
Hello, Matt. Hello, Doctor. Good to see you guys. I'd be for that life is better with God than without God.
Why?
Like, what would your guys' thoughts be?
Okay, let me stop here. I'm going to mute you for a second. I want you to listen to me, Theo, because you and I have had quite a few conversations. You've called in a few times to different shows. This is not a show where you call in with the topic, life is better with God than without God, and then say, what are your guys' thoughts on this? You don't need to call in for that. You could send a super chat. You could ask a question, whatever. Hey, what do you guys think about this? My question, and I have lots of questions on this topic, because if your position is that life is better with God than without God, I have no idea what life with God is like, so I can't say that life with God or without God is better. You are then in a position where, in order for you to say that life with God is better, you must know what life with God is like. And so the first question is, are you saying that life with an actual God in it is better, or life with belief that there's a God is better? Which one of those are you advocating for?
Life with an actual God.
How do you know that there's an actual God in your life? What method do you use to detect that there's a God?
Direct revelation, right? God has revealed that he is good, right? To me, he's written his law, on my heart, on everyone's heart, to love God, to love your neighbor as yourself.
Okay. You say that God has revealed to you that he's good. How do you know that's not a delusion?
So this, because God is always truth revealing, right? This is a question from within the Christian worldview, right? So it would be an internal critique.
I'm sorry. So you don't get to just assume the Christian worldview. I'm asking you. So there are people who think that they have a relationship with an actual God. And then there are people who believe in a God, but don't think it's demonstrable. And then there are people like me who used to believe, but don't have any good reason to believe. And so I'm trying to figure out, how can someone be confident that they actually have some sort of interaction with a God? You don't get to just say, oh, well, if we assume the Christian worldview or whatever else. No, you have to show how you know that there's a God.
Well, it's because God is a necessary precondition for knowledge and human intelligibility.
No, it's not.
Right? Without the Christian God, you couldn't know anything.
No, it's absolute. God is not a necessary precondition for knowledge. And even if there was some being that was a necessary precondition for knowledge, that's irrelevant to whether or not the Christian God exists and whether or not life is better with the God. How do you demonstrate that God exists?
God is a necessary precondition for demonstration itself.
Okay, goodbye.
Right? So we're speaking about worldview.
I'm not wasting I'm not wasting any more of the audience's time on this, and I'm not wasting Dr. Adair's time on this. If all you're going to do is assert that God is necessary, your assertions are meaningless here. Those assertions would be just the same if they came from someone who was delusional and thought that there was a God. You need a methodology to show that a God exists. Do you have one, or are you just going to assert one?
Yeah, I do have a methodology.
And why didn't you
So,
start with that?
essentially-
Let's try it again. Let's start all over. Theo's calling from Tennessee. He picked a good week because Dr. Adair's here, and Theo is not going to merely assert that God exists or that God is necessary, but Theo is going to provide a mechanism by which we can know that a God exists. Theo, the floor is yours.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Doctor. So basically the mechanism by which we can know that God exists is by evaluating the different theories of knowledge, right, the different epistemologies. You have idealism, which would hold to that like reality is essentially a product of the mind. You have empiricism, which would hold to that the way that we can come to know things is through the senses. And then, so you have those sorts of doing, and also transcendental idealism, which is what Kant kind of held to. So if you evaluate these different theories of knowledge, you come to ask the question, well, which one actually provides you with access to ontology, to the true nature of being? And whichever whichever epistemology, whichever theory of knowledge provides you access to that which is the case, is the correct one to go with, right? Because then you have access to the truth, and this is in line, with Socrates' dialectics.
And you think that demonstrates that a God exists?
Yeah. You go and you evaluate these different theories of knowledge. You say, okay, well, which one
I did evaluate different theories of knowledge, and God came up wanting. See, you can't assert that a God exists, and you can't try to solve a problem of epistemology by asserting that there's a God that makes it true.
Well, how did God come up wanting from your evaluation of the different epistemologies?
Because there isn't a way to demonstrate that God exists, nor is there a way to demonstrate that God needs to exist to serve as a grounding for ontology or epistemology.
Yeah. So can we know anything apart from the Christian God?
You have to demonstrate that something needs a grounding rather than something just is.
Okay, so can we have knowledge? Can you know things if you didn't exist, or could I know things if I didn't exist?
Can you know something if you don't exist? Not that I'm aware of. How could anything that doesn't exist have any properties at all?
Yeah, exactly. So this shows that like being or ontology is of a higher order than epistemology, right? So the being precedes
No,
the
it
theory
doesn't.
of knowledge.
No, it doesn't. The fact that something that doesn't exist can't have properties does not tell you anything about higher orders or comparisons between ontology and epistemology. It's simply at the foundation of logic is identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. We can't go beyond that. We have to assume that they are reliable because we have no way to demonstrate that they aren't reliable. But when you are trying to claim that being is a higher order, you're using gobbledygook language. There's no such thing as higher order.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so wouldn't ontology have to be able to provide for one's theory of knowledge? Like, it would have to be the proper environment or attributes to do so?
Ontology is about what something is. Epistemology is how you to figure out whether or not your model of ontology is correct or not. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge. It is our way of telling whether or not our beliefs are right about things. And so, can someone be wrong about ontology?
and they'd be wrong. Well, they could assert things that are false about it, but
sure.
basically
How
ontology.
do you, and how would you tell if someone's claim about ontology is true or false?
Well, it's given that ontology is a mind which is revelatory, right?
No, it's not.
given
Ontology is
one-
not, and I swear, Theo, I'm going to hang up on you if you keep this up. We've been down this road before. Ontology is not a mind. Ontology is the study of what is. And my question was, if someone makes a claim about ontology, wouldn't you have to use an epistemology to determine if the claim about ontology is correct or not?
I mean, sure. I mean, that's definitely one way.
Wouldn't
It's
that
one way to
mean?
do that.
Wouldn't that mean in your hierarchy of contingency that therefore knowledge of ontology is contingent on sound epistemology?
I don't believe so. I mean, we have different options.
Then we can't
right?
continue
Like, we
this
could
conversation. Then we can't continue this conversation. If you think that ontology is verifiable by something other than epistemology, what is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? With the different things. So, all right. So we're talking
see you
about
later. Thanks, Theo.
different.
Bye. I didn't want to, because Aaron's an expert in physics and in Bible stuff. I didn't necessarily want to throw you in on the epistemology stuff because we don't know each other. But Theo and I have gone back and forth on this over and over, and it's just keeps asserting that epistemology must be grounded on ontology rather than acknowledging that things can be interconnected.
Yeah, I felt like I wanted to jump in and say earlier that
Do that.
when he said that idealism was an epistemology, and if I'm not mistaken, idealism is an ontology compared to physicalism or materialism, while it's rationalism that is the epistemology. I wanted to say that before anyone else put something down in the comments and said, why didn't you correct that? But perhaps also, in as much as I'm trying to be generous to Theo's points, there is the point that he is true that, like, if I don't exist, then I definitely can't have thoughts, correct or incorrect. So my existence is prior or higher, but that wouldn't necessarily mean all of ontology. We could just say that, all right, I exist, and that's a necessary precondition before doing anything else, but that doesn't mean physicalism or materialism or idealism or anything else is superior or higher than some sort of epistemology. Just that we first have to agree I'm here in the room having the discussion. And I think we got past that point. From everything else after that is fun.
My being is not identical to being in that sense. And so there's an equivocation fallacy. So by the way, anytime you think that you want to jump in, jump the fuck in, talk right over me. I'll stop talking, I shut up, and everything else. Cause we're good to go here. Stephen in the UK, pronouns are he, him, has a critique of, or says that my critique of the Kalam is unsuccessful. Okay, cool. Thanks, Stephen. How, in what way?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I wanted to respond to your critique of the Kalam, which kind of, I think, is predicated on this idea that God isn't mentioned in the premises.
Or the conclusion?
Yeah. So, with respect to that particular...
What would you say about an argument for X that doesn't include X anywhere in the argument?
Yeah, sure. So I agree with you, definitely, that in that formulation of the argument, we could take issue with how it's presented. I think the problem, though, is that so the Kalam is sort of like a family of arguments, and there are multiple presentations of that argument.
Yes.
That do include God in the premises and in the conclusion, number one. Number two, some of Craig's earlier presentations of the argument, so like his 1999 presentation of the argument, does include the notion of a creator in the premises. So just those 2 points.
Okay. So you're saying that my critique doesn't apply to some other version of the argument other than the one I was critiquing. Cool.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that your version of your critique of the argument latches on to a version of the argument that is either A, easily remedied, or B, doesn't address the full argument as it's presented within the literature that he's written.
So what's the most common version of the Kalam cosmological argument across the board? And what's the most common version by Bill Craig? It's everything
Sure.
that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. That is the beginning, middle, and end of the syllogism as most commonly presented by Craig, as repeatedly published. It is, when you go to the Wikipedia entry for the Kalam cosmological argument, that's what's presented there. From that point on, then they add additional things, like if the universe has a cause, an uncaused personal God is, or creator, is the most likely explanation, whatever. It shifts to a more abductive line of reasoning in order to shoehorn in the creator. But at the end of the day, I presented a form of the argument and showed what was wrong with that form. What was wrong with what I said?
Okay. So just on that point, in the presentation that he said, with whatever begins to exist, so like the first half of the Kalam. So the idea is in a lot of his written work. So like the 1979 book, which was updated in the 2000 book.
What was wrong with what I
presentation.
said? What was
Okay.
wrong with what I said? You don't get to go to his other written work or what he said in 1979 or things that he added to it afterwards. I presented the argument and showed that was presented and showed what was wrong with it. What was wrong with what I said?
So far, nothing is wrong with what you said.
Cool. Thanks for calling.
No. So what I think, but what I think is important is that when Craig develops the argument, and
Here, I'm going to mute you for a second, Stephen. Listen to me very carefully. I presented an argument and showed what was wrong with that argument. If Bill Craig or any other defender of that argument would like to engage me on a broader version of that argument, I'm here live multiple times a week. I'm here available for booking for a debate. If Bill Craig wasn't such a coward, he would have debated me on the many opportunities that he had to do this. Do you think that you are about to say anything about the Kalam and Craig's other additions to it that I'm unaware of? Do you think I'm unaware of what you're getting ready to say?
I'm unsure of whether or not you're aware of it, but I mean, I can't make any presumptions about that.
That's right. But you did make a presumption because you presumed to call in that instead of knowing what you know and setting things up, that I just skipped it out of what reason would I have? Am I just clueless? Here's a better question.
Yeah, okay.
Out of everything that Craig has ever added to the version of the Kalam that I presented, does any of it result in a valid and sound argument for the existence of God?
Okay. So all sound arguments are valid arguments. I guess that's one point. The second point is that,
but not all. But not. Oh my God.
But
let me stop talking. Stop talking. Stop talking. I say valid in sound. I'm aware that all sound arguments must be valid in structure. I say it because most people don't know the difference between valid and sound, and I'm here to actually teach stuff. My question was, in all the things that Craig has added to the version of the Kalam I presented, does any of that result in a sound argument for the existence of God, you pedantic motherfucker?
Okay, sure. So I think that
Does
me personally,
anything that Craig has added to it make a sound argument for the existence of God? That is a yes or no question.
I don't think so. So I don't
I
think that
don't
the argument's
either.
successful.
I don't either.
Sure.
And I
Sure.
suspected, but I wasn't sure that you don't either. So what's the
Yeah.
point of this? Because I was playing
Well,
chess and you stepped in to tell me that I made a bad move when I didn't.
no, yeah. So I think that there's a general type of critique that is often offered that is unsuccessful because the argument can be reformulated in ways such as to avoid the critique, because you could embed God within the premises, like in the Erasmus 2018 presentation of the argument, and then the critique or the worry that God isn't embedded within the initial premises sort of goes away. And I think then it's better to just address the philosophical arguments in defense of the premises.
Stephen, what was my goal in presenting that critique? What was my goal? Because in order for you to say it was unsuccessful, that suggests you seem to know what my goal is. So what was my goal?
What was the goal? Presumably to show that the argument is either unsound or the premises are false. Or that it doesn't establish its conclusion.
It's bait. It's bait.
Okay.
I've spent 20 years now talking about this stuff. I've covered everything you're likely to say at some point in the countless thousands of hours there.
Yeah.
I get theists coming at me nonstop. What about the Kalam? What about the Kalam? Go watch.
Sure.
If you did a catalog of every caller that's ever presented the Kalam, maybe 2 in 20 years have gone beyond the very short version that I addressed. Bill Craig was offered multiple opportunities to debate me. He refused.
Yeah.
And he gave different excuses. And I also published a video talking about how exactly he debates and what I would do to counter that debate. He won't debate me. That's fine. I retract my accusation he's a coward. I don't know what his reasoning is. I can't read his mind. But you also can't read my mind. So I published something, and I'm usually very particular about what I say and how I say it. And you assumed a motivation that I don't have, and you assumed ignorance that is not there. And then you called in so that you could tell me how unsuccessful it was at doing the thing that it wasn't supposed to be doing. And you've also acknowledged nothing wrong with what I did. And even when you take in the things that I didn't include, it doesn't result in a sound argument for the existence of God. So how is this call not a big waste of time?
Yeah. So okay. So I take those points on board. So first, I think that the reason why the call isn't a big waste of time is that we could have better or worse critiques of the Kalam. I think that one of the reasons why the critique of the Kalam is not as successful as it could be is that even if we grant that your critique establishes, for instance, only that the universe has a cause, and that God isn't worked into the premises, the argument can be reformulated to just avoid the critique. Instead, we have
you didn't even fucking listen. You're still not fucking listening. You just can't listen, can you?
The original
you just have to be right.
And so it collapses.
You just have to be right, so you're not listening. Goodbye. I told you it was bait. There was nothing wrong with it. It was bait to get people to point out, well, you didn't address this, which they did, which is exactly what you did. But there's nothing wrong with what I said. Sometimes I'm doing things for reasons that you might not sort out, Stephen, but you didn't even listen to when I was explaining it. All right. Back to actual calls. That aren't about what somebody thinks about me or my thing. So Tone, or is it Tone, and Texas pronouns are he, him, thinks the universe looks infinite and only changes states. And so this is all Aron.
All right.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi there. Am I on? That was sudden.
Yes, you're on the show. Welcome.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for taking my call. Matt, I'm a huge fan, but I don't want to fanboy. The reason I'm calling is because of your co-host.
Yes. I've already
Dr.
turned it over to
Adair.
him. I think you weren't quite there yet. Go for it.
I'm sorry. So I don't want to fanboy too much. I'm a big fan of Matt. I love you. The only reason I'm calling in, though, is because of your co-host, Dr. Adair, I believe. And you're introduced as both a physicist and, someone who studies theology. Those are my two favorite subjects. But I just wanted to ask about what your opinion was on the basic idea of like a cyclical universe, possibly what do they call it, the big crunch or the big bounce nowadays. But the fact that I could even kind of put it into a syllogism for Matt. But what's your idea about that? About the universe being sort of infinite, but just going through different stages?
All right. So also for the sake of everyone else in the audience, the different models, what's supposed to be in tune there. So basic agreement that we have in cosmology is approximately 13.8 billion years ago, and that's billion with a B. We have this extremely hot dense state that we call the Big Bang, from which the known universe expands from and cools down and eventually becomes a whole bunch of interesting stuff, including us having this conversation. The question then is, what was before, if anything? What's going to be coming in the future? You mentioned things like the big bounce or the big crunch, and the idea there is, if the universe is expanding out from its initial state from the Big Bang, is it the case that it'll eventually slow down in expansion, turn back around, and crunch back down? And if it can crunch back down, can it also then bounce back out? So the crunch, bounce sort of cyclical model. That's what you were getting at, right, Dude?
Yeah. That's the idea that I had in mind. Yes.
Yeah. So I would at least say my current understanding is the evidence is significantly against that. For one thing, that we are able to now do extremely good jobs of mapping out just how much stuff there is in the universe, and the amount of stuff out there is there to help tell us basically, is the universe have enough stuff to basically slow itself down and collapse back in. Basic physics idea is this: if I take a ball and I throw it up, if I'm throwing it up with just arm strength, almost certainly it's going to come back down and fall down. If I take even a significant amount of steroids, I might be able to throw the ball up. It's still going to probably come back down. If I attach the ball to a rocket, okay, now it can actually shoot up and potentially never come back down. The question is, when the universe started out, was there enough of an oomph in the stuff being thrown out for it to go out forever or to come back in? The way we figure that out is trying to measure the overall density of the universe, and we see that the universe is almost exactly at what we call that critical density. If the universe is going to collapse back in, expand out forever, or just on that very edge case of the two, that seems to be where we're at. And on top of that, it seems like the biggest component of the mass energy of the universe doesn't actually attract everything in, but actually causes further expansion, the thing that's been called dark energy. So if you got something that basically says, we measure things out and there isn't enough stuff to collapse things in, and there's this extra stuff that's continuing to make the universe expand out more, that particular model of bang crunch doesn't work. That is at least not a cyclical model that's in vogue anymore.
No,
as for what's going to happen to our universe,
we're expanding faster than we could ever retract, according to gravity, basically.
In a way of thinking about it is we've passed the escape velocity. So fire off a rocket past escape velocity, it won't return. Yeah, that's basically what we got going on with the universe.
Okay.
So we've beaten gravity.
So do you think the universe is a singular instance? The universe as we know it. I'm not talking about like the cosmos and I'm an atheist myself. I'm just trying to understand these things.
Yeah.
Do you think that this universe that we live in is a singular instance, or like maybe? I mean, I read Lawrence Krauss. Well, I read part of Lawrence Krauss's book. And do you think that this is just sort of a one thing that happened one time?
So we can, of course, only directly observe right now the one instance of a universe. It's the one we characteristically call the observable universe, because the unobservable ones are really hard to do science on. But this kind of relates to, are there other universes, for example? Now, the way that we might be able to actually make scientific progress there is if we can, find the strong evidence for what's called cosmic inflation. This was a theory that was first put forward by Alan Guth at MIT back in 1980. Guth is actually still alive. I've had a chance to meet him once at MIT here in Boston. But basic idea is his theory of inflation explains some of the earlier problems that Big Bang Theory has, but it also has the side effect that it basically says that inflation that happened early on in the universe doesn't necessarily stop everywhere and anywhere, so it can be continuously inflating more and more universes. It very naturally produces an infinity of universes. So if his version of inflation is correct, then there has been lots of banging happening, perhaps infinitely so. Is it true? We don't really know. Could we determine that it's true? Surprisingly, yes. In fact, I was reminded that it was maybe 10 years ago now. I forget exactly how long ago. We thought we actually had empirical evidence of the effects of cosmic inflation. It was a really big news story. Some of the big founding figures in inflation had like these YouTube videos of like going up to people saying, "Hey, I'm working on this experiment down in Antarctica, and we just proved your theory of inflation." And like open the corks on the champagne and things like that. Several months later, other research comes in and says, the results can be completely explained by just dust. Darn. We went from, we just proved the infinity of all possible universes to, it's dusty outside. We got to clean this up first. This is unfortunately where we're at right now with the science. Who knows? In 10 years, maybe we'll have better evidence.
Through. Yes.
Yeah. I am hopeful we can show something like that, true or false either way. If I were to place money, I would probably place money in favor of cosmic infinite inflation, but no more than $100. Okay. First off, there's not that much money in my wallet, and two, I just want to go where this evidence goes. Right now, it's too ambiguous to be sure.
Honestly, that was literally what I called them to ask as your opinion. Where you would put your money. So you completely answered my question. I appreciate it, and I have a couple of more things to go look into now as an armchair, scientist myself. But you
can get a lot done in the armchair, but also make sure you get outside and look at that universe too. Telescopes are a wonderful thing. Even if you don't do science with it, there's just so much beauty out there. Check it all out.
I can disprove any flat earther by taking them up to my cabin for a month and looking at the damn moon. I'm just saying,
you can definitely prove it, but can you convince them? That's another question.
If I sent you a flat earther, I'm not convinced that they would be convinced.
Well, it's just me and them for a whole month. I bet you. But no, thank you for taking my call.
Thanks.
Thank you for your honest opinion, because that's literally what I called in for, and I don't want to take any more of your show's time.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. I was I go down rabbit holes on YouTube all the time. As a matter of fact, YouTube's about all I watch, which means I'm not always getting the best news, but I'm trying to find better news sources that are potentially live or up to date on there, because I don't have any cable service. I just have the internet and all the packages. Basically, I have cable because I have all these packages. But I was watching, and I watch a lot of science content and documentaries and interesting stuff. And so we were just talking about nautical miles yesterday, and I was in the Navy for 8 years. And so there was a video that came up like, what's a nautical mile? And I was like, 6,000 feet, which is the approximation that we use for a nautical mile, as opposed to 5,280 feet that we use for, a standard imperial mile. And my friend who was over was like, why are they different, and why do we need that? And so that led to trying to explain some stuff, and then looking at videos where we ended up showing how using an astrolabe for celestial navigation, essentially, so that you're measuring the angle from the horizon to a particular star at different times leads to a calculation. Merely doing that leads to a calculation where you can approximate the circumference of the Earth. We don't have to do what Aristophanes did, with some sticks and wells and other stuff like that. And all these people who are like, oh, you can go up in a plane and you don't see any curvature. All these, and it's just like absolutely convinced that the Earth's flat. And I'm like, have you never thought about or looked at celestial navigation? It confirms that it only works with this model. And so, basically you divide the sky up into 60 segments and then you do the math there. So it was fun getting kind of sidetracked there. I'm genuinely baffled. Like the guy that I debated last week, who was supposed to not be presenting anything about flat Earth, spent a good deal of time pointing out there's no evidence that there's any movement or anything like that. And I'm like, there's a visible sun, moon, stars, other planets, asteroids. There's the various constellations that we've imposed onto the structures, and we can do calculations and watch things change. And the fact that there's completely different stars in the northern hemisphere than there are in the southern hemisphere, we can track this. The model of movement only makes sense with a globe, and the math all works out, and you have satellites in geosynchronous orbit and things like that. There's something else going on. It's not just scientific ignorance. It is a general distrust of any authority. You got that from the man. You got that from the government. You got that from this and
or
I can't even
any
say
other
that the
just so
distrust
story
is
to make it go
unjustified.
away.
Yeah, I can't even say the
Like,
distrust is
I-
unjustified.
Yeah. Now, you could potentially do all of celestial navigation with an extremely complicated geocentric model that would make Ptolemy blush with the number of epicycles that you'd be throwing on top of this thing. But you still have things to explain, like Foucault's pendulum, where you could just do this on the ground, and depending on your latitude, as the day goes on, you can see this pendulum swing back and forth. And depending on, like I said, what latitude you're on, how many, what degrees it'll actually swing through in its cycle. And you get different results whether you're further north, south, or at the equator, or at the poles. And I don't know if flat earthers can even try to explain something like that other than just shouting, make it go away.
Yeah, and eclipses and all those things. And the fact that we're able to not just observe an eclipse, predict an eclipse down to the second. We just went through this a couple weeks ago. We're going to be doing it again in April when there's a total solar eclipse that is viewable from the Austin area. We'll be having LineCon, which is a good reminder if you're not already supporting the line, either with a membership here on the channel or at patreon.com/calltheline, you should consider doing those things. One of the things we're currently working on, and I believe Jimmy has actually booked a venue for the weekend for LineCon, is getting everybody together around the time of that eclipse, getting the hosts and co-hosts and guests, and maybe we can get Dr. Adair down there too to come hang out and have some fun, give some talks, talk about what's going on.
So first off, dude, yes, because I know if I stay here in New England hoping to see the eclipse, what am I going to get? Clouds.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's the other thing. I have to do this. For years, I worked with the atheist community of Austin, and we had our annual bat cruise, because Austin has the largest metropolitan bat population, I think in the world, but definitely in the U.S. There's more than 1 million bats that live underneath the Congress Street Bridge. And at night, they go out to feed, which is why we don't really have a problem with mosquitoes and other bugs here in the way we had in other areas where I've lived. And we'd always have to say, hey, you're going to come out, we're going to take a boat out, you're going to get to hang out with people, but we cannot guarantee that you see bats because we can't control the weather. We can't make sure it's not overcast. We can't make sure that, it's lit well enough. All we can say is there's bats, and you'll probably be able to hear them. And if you tilt your head back and stick your tongue out, you might catch a snowflake from a bat if you're very lucky. It's not actually snowflakes, but on that note, there's for those who aren't familiar, tonight's show, The Hang Up, is just one show on the entire Line Network. In addition to this program, there's a number of other great shows, and I just lost all my notes. Doggone it. Tomorrow is the Transatlantic Call-In Show at 2 p.m. Central. So 5.5 hours before right now is when you want to tune in. And that's going to have Arden Hart, who's over there producing right now, and Josie Caballero. The 2 p.m. Transatlantic Call-In Show. If you or someone you know has questions about trans-related issues, trans rights, if you've been called a transphobe and you're proud of it and want to explain why, if you've been called a transphobe and you don't know why and would desperately like to get out from underneath that saddle, you should definitely tune in and give them a call. Also, there's been a lot of new legislation passed and new policies with regard to just trans rights in general. I'm sure that some of that will be covered, but if you have questions about it, this is your opportunity to talk to two real live trans folks about their views on this so that maybe you can catch up with the rest of the world. Maybe not. Maybe you can fix all of us. On Sunday, we have the Sunday show, which is also, excuse me, also at 2 p.m. Central. This Sunday will be me and Jimmy. I will be hoping to get back with enough time to actually do the Sunday show, as I'm going to DebateCon this weekend. And Modern Day Debates is doing DebateCon 4 in Dallas, where I will be debating Christianity versus secular humanism, and kind of which is a better for the world, or which is a better one for us to adopt and live. I'll also be doing a debate later in the month on should we be atheists, a topic that I've never debated. And when it was suggested to me, I was so instantly enthralled that I said yes without thinking. Don't get me wrong, till I'm dead, I'm going to be debating, is there God? Is there evidence for God? Is it reasonable to believe in a God? Does science prove a God? By the way, has physics found God yet, Aaron?
Let me check. Only if you're dyslexic, then it's dog, yes.
There you go. But so those are the debates that are coming up, and I should be back in time for Jimmy and I to do the Sunday show on Tuesday. Next Monday, Skeptalk is going to be Forrest Valkai, which means it's going to be an 18-hour show. And that's great because I joke, but and Forrest is a friend. I could listen to Forrest for 18 hours. It's easy. Tuesday will be Dying Out Loud with Dave Warnock and Footless Joe. And next week's Hang Up will feature Eve Was Framed. So we've got a full cavalcade of shows ready to go. We got 2 more callers we want to get to. Yeah, let's go ahead and take these callers. This one may need a little bit of an introduction. Johnny in Maryland wants to talk about Qualia, which we addressed on a recent show as well. I think there may just be a slight disagreement here in what was said, but I think I can fix it. How you doing, Johnny? Welcome to the show.
Good. Hi, how you doing?
I'm all right.
Yeah, I don't really understand the whole Qualia argument. My thing was more on the argument of the whole Mary colorblind. I didn't really know what Qualia was.
Yeah.
But I just want to give a brief description of a Qualia. And it wasn't really about Qualia. It was more about like how Mary, how she can't. Again, the argument, I guess, it's saying that Mary is in this box for so long she doesn't know what red is. When she comes out, she knew what red is with everything beforehand, but so when she comes out, does she learn anything from just seeing red for the first time? Kind of.
Sure.
And I mean, that's like a dumbed down version of it, but and I was just thinking it was like the whole thought experiment just seems like kind of a paradox on itself when it's saying that she knows something that she couldn't know before she went in because she couldn't see it. You know what I mean? So how would she have that knowledge in the first place to say that she has all-encompassing knowledge? It's kind of this weird paradox, like a word.
Well, okay, so now you're just objecting because the thought experiment is specifically constructed to say that Mary knows everything there is to know about color. That's just defined that way. If your objection is, how could Mary possibly know everything about color? Then you're just throwing out the thought experiment. It doesn't matter. These things are done as thought experiments where you accept the premises. If you're just going to reject the premise,
that's what I want to. I want to say if we basically redid the thought experiment in the way of where it was that Mary went in there knowing what she could know about knowledge. You know what? Like so it makes a little more sense in reality. Like, would the outcome differ?
That's not the purpose of the thought experiment. The purpose
Well,
of the
no, I
thought
know, but I'm
experiment.
just saying the thought experiment they had, it leads you to the conclusion that it wants to lead you to, because it has that paradox in it, like set in it. So, you can't have all of knowledge of something without first having that experience of it. So,
no, that's not true. That's the point. So you've managed to confuse two different things. First of all, a thought experiment exists so that you set up premises to create sort of like a reductio ad absurdum if you want. But if you're saying nobody could have that knowledge, okay, then you're just throwing out the thought experiment. But if you're saying you couldn't have that thought experiment, or you couldn't have that knowledge without direct experience, now you're making an assertion that is the entire point of the thought experiment, which is it possible to have knowledge of something without experiencing it?
Right.
And that we set that aside to say, when the whole purpose of this is to find out when someone experiences something, do they gain any new knowledge? Is there some property of the thing? And that's what they want qualia to be.
Oh, I see. I see what you mean.
I would recommend,
Yeah.
I would recommend both reading what Dan Dennett and some other philosophers have said, but also looking into, Dan Dennett has a book called Intuition Pumps that's all about thought experiments, but they exist in a bunch of different realms. And, Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment. There's plenty of others, but this one, if you specifically look up Mary the Color Theorist, I think is what you'll find it as, you'll find a full description of it that might clear up some confusion. But if your objection is, well, she couldn't know that, you're essentially asserting qualia.
Right. I can see that. Yeah. I see what you mean. For me, it was tricky because just how the whole thought experience set up, it's really kind of related to my whole life. Because I was, colorblind. I am colorblind. I've been an artist my whole life, so I haven't seen color, for 40 years. And then I got a pair of colorblind glasses for like my 41st birthday. So like just seeing the color.
What's that experience like?
What's that?
What's that experience like to go? Are you totally colorblind, or you're like red, green, or?
I'm like a bunch of different. I can't tell the difference between green and brown, blue and purple, like red and orange, sometimes red and yellow. So it's like a severe. So like when I first got it was crazy. It was like a religious experience. It was really weird to go that long, especially being an artist. So it was really weird. It was very strange to see all new colors. And just how much you're missing out in life, it's such a crazy, vibrant difference in the world. It's like almost like a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory kind of over the top when you put the glasses on. Like, it takes a little while for them to take hold. I mean, you just start to see it, and I see I can see red now. I can see some of purple. So it's pretty emotional. You can see.
It's a weird question.
There's videos online of people doing it. I didn't want to put my experience online and be just crying.
No.
Into a camera.
Definitely, I find it absolutely intriguing. There's the whole thing which I mentioned the other day, which is my red, your red, and all that stuff. We're not going to get into any of that now, but I've watched the videos of people both essentially with cochlear implants, essentially hearing sound for the first time, and people getting the colorblind correcting glasses like you were talking about. And it's awe-inspiring, and it's like, if you watch those and don't want to cry, I don't know. I don't know how you can consider yourself a human. That's unfair, because I get it. Some people aren't going to be moved by things, but it's like every time I watch those things where somebody is seeing or hearing for the first time clearly, I fall apart.
Yeah, it's pretty shaky.
I'm similar. I remember seeing some videos of babies wearing glasses for the first time and going from complete everything's blurry to seeing their mother's face for the first time, and you can't help but have your heart melt.
Oh, God. Right, yeah. And I can see how theists could use that. That's kind of what I was nervous about when I was talking about it, because I could see how, atheists could use that in a lot of different ways, to try to work their angles and really use that emotional, pull on it, to try to convince people of, like the whole spirit thing or whatever.
Well, thanks for the call, and I'm glad that that you found a solution that works for you. I'd be interesting to compare like before and after artwork, to see.
I'm working
how much of a
on
difference
some
it made.
stuff now, actually. Yeah, to do that. So I'll let you know. I'll keep in contact with you. I did have another
Awesome.
question, but I don't know if it's completely unrelated.
Go for it.
So I don't know if you've asked for enough time.
Ask it. If
or
it's
not,
not
but it
right,
was just about-
we'll shelf it.
Okay. As like an atheist, I think I've heard you talk before about how you don't like atheists getting like churches, or you don't like the idea of that. And I didn't know if you could talk more about that. Like, what would be like if I wanted to, get as an atheist, get like access to a church to use it to help the homeless and stuff, and get that benefit. Like, what do you think? What are like the pros and cons of doing that?
I have no problem with secular organizations. I don't like the name Atheist Church. There's like the North Texas
Right.
Church of Free Thought, which I'm not fond of the name, but I love the people there, and I've spoken there before. Then there's organizations like Oasis and Sunday Assembly and all these things that are very much like a secular church. There's also the Unitarian Universalists, and there's a number of ethical societies. And so there's organizations out there that are local communities, people meeting up in a way that is very similar to church. I don't like the church label because the church label is not just Christian, but Protestant in its origins. And so it's a little too narrow. You've got, church and synagogue and all these different labels for things. It just seems too minimizing. It's like when people claim, "Oh, are you a Christian? Are you a Protestant atheist or a Catholic atheist?" And I'm like, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard. I'm an atheist with regard to all of them. But as far as we're still communal creatures, most of us. There are some people who don't need and don't want that, but having communities, I don't know. Aaron, have you spoke at any of those or had thoughts on those communities?
Let's just say this much. If you try to make our organizations like churches, if you try to make atheist churches like, especially with my growing up and going to Catholic Mass, you are just going to put people to sleep. We want to make sure that whatever organization we have, that yes, it should be doing good. Yes, it should have a sense of community. But if we also are trying to do the same mimicry of what happens in churches, which people are just leaving in droves, we're really not feeling a need that we need to figure out. And how to do that the right way, what's the best way to making an organization, that's way outside my knowledge base.
Yeah, my idea was more chiseled down to just having it like working with already organizations like HUD and different helping homeless and organizations that are out there, and kind of taking the church grounds and using that, whether it be in actual like housing the homeless or offices to run that program. And I think churches could be seen as healing centers, what they're supposed to be, in a better way. There's so many of them that are just kind of, especially in Baltimore where I live, that are just emptying up for sale. And there's a lot of investors that want to put money in that stuff. They have no idea what to do with it.
I would absolutely, so when I used to run the ACA, we frequently looked for churches that were for sale, because nothing's going to be better publicity than an atheist community meeting in a church that had to close down because they didn't have enough parishioners. And we found one that would have been perfect. We just didn't have the money for it at the time, along with people with the interest. If I could find a decent church that we could buy, I would have an atheist community center in a former church, if for no other reason than the news would want to write about it every few weeks. Like, wait, what's this? The godless heathens took over a church? Yes. And they're having events to feed the homeless, things like that.
And you're mostly stationed
Rather
out
than
of,
just
like,
buying the church and
Texas,
turning into
right?
another pawn shop.
Yeah. The other option, I guess, would also be to turn it into like a porn shop. I would laugh at that.
Jesus is coming. Yes, we get it.
Yes.
I thought it'd be great to do like a bar and have have like different like a heaven and hell theme, and set up like strip poles and have like the different strippers dress up as like devils and angels. That's a whole different conversation.
Bar, strip club, any of the things that I find. Actually, I'm not that fond of bars, but strip clubs, stuff like that. Yeah, but no. In all seriousness, Johnny, if there's an opportunity, like
right.
I find the Catholic Church to be a criminal organization that I would love to see bankrupted, and I would love to see every Catholic cathedral in the world, in the entirety of Vatican City, have all of its resources gathered up and used to feed and clothe those in need. Just give them a place to stay. You know how many people we could house in those facilities and begin rebuilding? That would be a personal dream of mine. Do I think it's going to happen? Not in my lifetime.
Something to work towards. All right, well, thank you, guys.
All right, I got one more call to get. Thanks, Johnny. And congrats on the glasses.
You guys have a good one. Oh, thank you.
All right. Do you, since I'm an idiot, and it's nice when I have guests on who are the exact opposite of me on that front, do you have a physics understanding and explanation for the glasses that help Johnny see color?
I don't know the details well. The best I can remember is an NPR story about this I remember hearing years ago. So please take this with a bag of salt. But I think it ultimately takes the colors that are in the ranges that whatever rods or cones aren't picking that up, and I guess shifting it to those color ranges that are more visible. So basically, if, for example, you can't see green so well, and I don't know color blindness really well, so I don't know if green is one of the colors you can't see, but just saying green light is coming in, have the glasses basically deflect that green color to the blue end or the redder end of the spectrum. So it's part of the spectrum your eyes can see. But again, I am going based on vague memories of an NPR story from perhaps a decade ago, and that should be discarded as quickly as possible.
All right. Final call before we get on to Super Chats. As a reminder, in addition to all the other shows here, we'll be reading out all the Super Chats over $10. As soon as we're done with this next call, we'll move on to that. So get your questions in, because there were so many calls and calls that I wanted to take. I didn't really get to, I would have done a show where I just sat down and asked Aaron all the physics questions I have. And so here's your opportunity to silence me for almost the entirety of the Super Chat section with regard to anything relevant by getting your questions in for Dr. Adair. And before we do that, let's see if we can help out Arthur in New York. Pronouns are they, them. Arthur is needing some pointers on deconstruction because getting into atheism is kind of jarring. So welcome, Arthur. What problems are you having?
Yeah. Hey, Matt. Hey, Doctor. Thanks for taking my call, by the way. Long time fan of the show. I'm having a lot of different problems, fear of hell, fear of rejection by God. I feel like I've been rejected by God. I feel like it's like something that I once believed was the truth so ardently, I'm starting to realize might not be the truth anymore. And when you believed for so many years and I went to seminary for like 2 years about, and got so indoctrinated and so much in the faith and spent so much toil and prayer and worship and cried tears and loved the Father so much and felt like I was so faithful and didn't really see much of it, like for all that faithfulness that I put into it, and that's kind of where I'm at. And I'd like to deconstruct more, but I just don't know how.
Well, I take this one a lot. Aaron, I don't know if you have thoughts on, we didn't even really get into, did you ever have to deconstruct? I mean, you did, but we didn't get into the details. So help Arthur out.
I can't say that I have a similar experience because insofar as I ever had like an active belief in God, it was some much more abstract being. Like I said, I basically, especially when I went to college, the way I described myself was Catholic deist, which I'm pretty sure is at least 3 different kinds of heresy. But the best I can say is that when you were thinking of God as what was true, what was good, and things like that, when you did things that you thought were good, what was going through your mind at that time? When you were saying, like, this is something that God would approve, what did that feel like to you in that moment?
It felt like it was actually kind of affirmed. When I was doing something good, I felt affirmed. I felt loved. I felt cared for. I felt like I was pleasing to the Father, that sort of thing. Like I was doing the right thing, you know?
All right. So, in many ways, that sounds similar to, like, if I'm doing something nice to a friend or family member, and I see the joy that it brings them, that gives me some sense of satisfaction. Take that moment and realize when you are doing good, whether or not someone is there to approve it, you realize the goodness in what you have done. And conversely, when you screwed up, which, okay, how many times did I screw up today? I need a bigger clock to memorize that. But all those goods and bads, the realization that ultimately it was you finding out and realizing, hey, here's the thing that I've done that was good today, that I brought a smile to a loved one today. Or conversely, here's something I should have done that, didn't reduce sorrow or even made someone sorrowful. When you realize that the things that really matter are with the people around you and with yourself, those are the only people that the approval that really ultimately matters. And sometimes you just have to stop and say, am I doing this for myself or for the people I care about? If God's not in the picture anymore, that's just one person less you have to care about.
Right.
But I'm being
and thank you
extremely
for that,
short
Doctor.
and glib, so I don't want to even pretend like I can talk away your fears. This is something that's going to take a lot of time and thought and development, and I could say I support your efforts, but this is going to be probably a long personal journey.
Right. And I gotta say, Matt, I'm very jealous of you and please tell me if I've kind of misconstrued your deconstruction story, but all the times I've heard it, it seems like you had a quick way out. It's like, I remember you telling that story about your college roommate so many times and how you just wanted to please the Father and you didn't want to get to heaven and have the Father say, here was your college roommate and he's burning in hell now because of you. How come you didn't try harder? And it was like that was your aha moment, and you realized, oh, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like you had a quick fix there, and I'm jealous of you for that.
Well, you can stop being jealous because that's not an accurate summation. First of all, I didn't go to college, so it wasn't my college roommate. It was just a roommate. But also, this was a period of over a year and a half of really intense prayer and study and trying to be the best Christian that I could be. And as it turns out, the best person I could be isn't a Christian. Then after that, there were countless issues where I lost friends and family members and fights and other things. There was not here's a realization and I'm done. I was much slower than some of the people that I've been able to talk to. What happened though is that, well, yeah, I was in my 30s. I have had 13-year-olds come up to be like, yeah, this stuff just didn't make sense to me, and so I moved on. That's impressive. But I was 30 or 31, I think, by the time I finally identified as an atheist. Now, what I will say is that I didn't suffer a lot of the problems that many other people did. I don't have a lingering fear of hell. Once I realized that the concept was not something that I could accept, then there's nothing left to be afraid of. It's like if you're afraid of monsters under your bed and then you figure out, oh, I have no reason to think this is the case. it no longer makes sense to be afraid of the monster under your bed. Doesn't mean you won't be.
Right.
It's just I'm not. And when I'm kind of pragmatic in the sense of it's like the call earlier where somebody wanted to call in and say that my critique of the Kalam was unsuccessful. Well, it was in fact unsuccessful, but not for the reason that they think. It was unsuccessful because it didn't get Craig or one of his acolytes to be foaming at the mouth to finally agree to debate me. So on that front, it was unsuccessful. But my thing is that I care about the truth and I care about efficiency, which is weird. One of my biggest pet peeves is having to repeat myself. And that's got to sound strange to people who've heard me say the same thing over and over for 20 years now. It's having to repeat myself to the same individual, which is why the call from Theo didn't make much progress today, because we'd already been down that road over and over again. And while I've certainly had it easier than many other people, for many reasons, not the least of which is that, I was in a cis white middle class, I had jobs. I knew what I was getting into. No, but I didn't have to. You don't have to tell anybody that you don't believe. You can just live your life. I put myself out there just as much as I was comfortable with, and I faced quite a bit of consequences because of it. I'm glad that I had it easier than some other people have had it, but I had it harder than some. It's just that I know people who have had it very, very difficult, and it would just be absolutely like insulting for me to start complaining. And so the most I've done was, like read the birthday cards that I got.
Right. Did you ever, in that year of intense prayer and study, did you ever feel like you still wanted it? And when you started to believe that it wasn't true anymore, did you ever come to the point where you're like, damn, I just want it to be true? Because that's kind of where I'm at. I so much kind of am starting to not believe and like am comfortable with saying I'm an agnostic, but it's like I still want it desperately to be true. Like, is that wrong? I just don't know.
Is it wrong for you to want something to be true? That's a question I can't answer. That's a question I can't answer. I wouldn't want it to be true. There was a talk Hitchens gave about how much he didn't want it to be true, that there was some God that was up there spying on everybody and watching everything and spying on your thoughts and making judgments, and that your private moments weren't private, and that, anything and everything is subject to this, flights of fancy and whatever. Would it be nice? There were aspects of it that I think would be nice. Would it be nice to live as long as I wanted to live? Sure. I'm not convinced living eternally is as good as some might suggest. At some point, I think just for fun, you might want it to end, just to change something. But I don't know. But would I like to live much, much longer and be healthier and have a body that's not going to, suffer? Absolutely. Would it be nice to see my loved ones again? Absolutely. Would it be cool to play cards with my grandma again? You bet your ass. Would it be my mom's Aunt Shirley just passed away a week or so ago? Would it be great to have her biscuits and gravy again? Fucking A. They were awesome. All of those things are desirable for me, but what's desirable for somebody else is up to them. And what I'm not desirous of is having all of the God baggage that I've already complained about as a condition for those things. Would it be worth it for, whole portions of humanity, whole portions of sentient life to be cast into a lake of fire just so I can play cards with my grandma again? No, I don't think that's worth it. And I worry about people who think it is worth it, but I understand that since there's no demonstration that this is actually true, you can have fond thoughts like that. You'd be like, yeah, no, I want that. I don't care that some people may end up, burning forever in hell. I want the afterlife. And they had that opportunity too. You can rationalize anything. We're living in a world full of rationalizing. And I'm guilty of it too. I just try to minimize it.
my other two questions for you, Matt and Doctor, if you have a statement about this or anything to add, would be, Matt, what was, other than what was maybe some really, was it just losing family members and loved ones that was the hardest part of your deconversion, or losing what you felt to be your relationship with God? How hard was that for you?
Losing a relationship with God impacted me not at all. I'd spent years asking God for a sign, for help, for instruction, for anything else. I lost a relationship with God long before I identified as an atheist, probably. As a matter of fact, it was me trying desperately to get that back, or to get what I thought back. I don't think I ever had a relationship with God. It's one of those, I don't think anybody does. It's like saying, if you were told for the first 18 years of your life that you're going to inherit $1 billion, and then you find out just before your 18th birthday that that wasn't true, well, now you've got a decision to make. Do you sit around and mope and be pissed off at everybody who gave you that information, that they lied to you? Do you ruin and waste the rest of your life out of irritation that you're not going to inherit $1 billion? And what's worse is, if you had lived your life as if you were going to inherit $1 billion, that means you've been preparing for something that wasn't true, which means you weren't preparing for the consequences of not getting $1 billion. And we do the same thing. If in fact there is no afterlife, then this is the one chance we have to live life, to enjoy it, to interact with people, to see good movies and bad movies, to have great meals, to have sex, to learn things, to see beautiful things, to find out what some other person thinks or feels, and then reach a conclusion that that's wonderful and you want to share it, or that's absolute bullshit, get out of my face, I don't want anything to do with you. All of those things, the whole tapestry that makes up a robust life, is diminished the second somebody talks about a God in particular, and an afterlife especially.
Dr. Adair, did you have anything to add to that? Maybe.
I had to step away for a minute, so I don't know what was discussed. Just very quickly, I had to step away. I was hearing my cat puking, and then my wife gagging because of the puke.
Gee.
So I had to
sorry
just-
to hear
Pathetic
that. Sorry to hear
household.
that. My other question for you, Matt, and maybe Doctor, is there anything within the context of biblical scripture that, Matt, that you would say maybe when you were a Baptist that you have changed your opinion about? As far as, like, would you say now maybe the Bible supports predestination? I don't know if Baptists believe in eternal predestination and that sort of thing. But, like, is there anything in particular that you say you've changed your mind as far as what the Bible supports doctrinally or theologically, whether or not you believe it to be true or not?
Yes, but not in the way you're asking. So let me kind of reframe your question so people can get where my answer is coming from.
Sure.
When I was a Southern Baptist, I used to believe that the Bible supported A, B, C, and D, and that people who,
How do you mean?
I this is an abstraction. I'm not listing the specific things. When I was a Southern Baptist, I would think the Bible supported A, B, C, and D, and Catholics would think that they supported A, D, F, G, C minus, whatever. Slight differences, and I would view them as wrong. And now I view both of them as wrong. And it is very clear that you can, with selective picking and choosing, make the Bible support almost, not quite, but almost anything you want, if you're very, very careful about what you select. One of my favorite debates of all time, I've said this before, was Matt Slick versus Jesse, I think was the guy's name. And so it was two Christians. You can probably find it online. And they're arguing about the most important subject, soteriology, about what must one do to be saved and whether or not it's, which of the models was correct. And each one of them would present a whole bunch of verses that supported their position, and the other one would present verses that supported their position. At no point did they provide verses that showed where the other person was just wrong, just that they disagreed about those things. And so my take on it now is not, oh, hey, I was a Southern Baptist and that turned out to be wrong when I thought others were wrong. It's they're all wrong. And the Bible, to quote my former co-host Don Baker, is the big book of multiple choice. And you get out of it almost whatever you want. Almost.
Right. Right.
And
No,
I would say that's
I see.
pretty much this. And I was going to pretty much just agree and basically say that, yeah, the Bible is so full of differing ideas and opinions and visions of the afterlife or no afterlife that any sort of systematic theology is doomed to failure, which is why we got, 30,000 different denominations. It's very much you get what you want to pull out of it, and those who will claim that they just have the biblical worldview, it's like you have some amalgamation where somebody pulls out a Bible script to attach to whatever political position they've happened to take that week.
Right. Now, is that both of your positions? Because the Bible is, as Don Baker would say, the big book of multiple choice because it's so full of so many contradictions. Is that why that's your view, Matt?
Not so much that it's
correct me if I'm wrong.
Not so much that it's specifically about contradictions. I think there's way too much put into potential contradictions of the Bible. There's robust charts with hundreds or thousands of contradictions, and I think they're garbage, most of them. And they're really easy to dismiss. I think that the reason that Christianity and Judaism and Islam have been successful is because they provide just enough information to be appealing to the people who find those particular things appealing, and just enough vagueness such that they can't be debunked. You have unfalsifiable claims about, oh, this is what God wants. Well, how do you know what God wants? I mean, the Bible literally says, let God be true and every man a liar. So why should I listen to you or any other preacher on the planet? Right away, we should immediately say we shouldn't listen to any preacher on the planet. Well, that's a rather strict interpretation there. Yeah, but how are you going to counter it? At the end of the day, it's I can find a verse that, well, the Bible undeniably sanctions, codifies, and allows for enslaving of other human beings. Expressly says these are your property. You can pass them on to your kids. Who you should buy, how much to pay for them, how you can beat them as long as they don't, all that stuff. And yet you can ignore all of that. You can go straight to some passage in the New Testament where Paul asks for a slave to be freed, and you can interpret that as if he's denouncing all of slavery, even though that's not remotely what's happening. And as long as people can do that, and the person who does that is a better human being than the person who wants to permit slavery based on the Bible, which happened all the time. And so you have a person who's a better human being, who's more clearly wrong about what the Bible says, and yet they're better. I mean, that debunks. I should show up at every debate and just say, people who disagree with the Bible's take on slavery are better human beings. If they're better human beings by denouncing the Bible, then Christianity must be false. Debate over.
Touche, Matthew. Touche. So one more thing. You know, I wanted to share this because this comes to my mind.
Okay, we
I
got
had
to
a
wrap
nightmare,
up.
a night terror. I had a night terror one time where God walked me in, where I believe that it was God walking me into what looked and appeared like the mount of the inner part of Khazad-dûm from Lord of the Rings. And he was just about to cast me into the fires of hell, pit of hell. And he said, "Son, this is for your own good." And I said, "Father, please, no." And he said, "I have to do it." And then I woke up in fear and anguish. And, you know, for the life of me, I've been dealing with that. And if that was God, well, then he's a monster. And if a God would allow Satan to enter my dream and give me that kind of delusion, he's still a monster.
Arthur, are you familiar with the organization Recovering from Religion?
Oh, yeah. I've been working with them quite a bit, actually. I go to
Okay, 'cause I was
groups, I
gonna say,
call
if
every
you're
now and again,
having-
yeah.
Oh, yeah, because I was going to say, if you're having night terrors like that, this very much seems like those who have professional training to help, rather than random person on a call show, is the person to ask about how to best work through that.
Right. Well, thank you guys for taking my call. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it, Arthur.
Thank you.
And yeah, keep
Bye.
working with recovering from religion.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
There we go. All right. We have a bunch of super chats. If you have time, we tend to alternate. I think you guys might have done this the other day. You want to go first?
Yes.
Go for it.
I'll go first. Yeah. So we got 1999 from Greg Markowski. Apologies. I will. Every time I mispronounce your name, you have to add $1. Every time I get it right, you have to add $2. One way or another, we're going to get more money for these super chats. Okay. So Greg says, is Aron any relation to the late Dr. Adair from Yale? His daughter used to teach there as well as was one of my instructors. I met Dr. Adair once while there. Thank you for the show and great guest, Matt. Okay. I know nothing about a Dr. Adair at Yale, so I am at a complete loss. I would say initially unlikely I'm related, but I don't know enough to say with any confidence. There's only one famous Adair that is supposed to be like a distant cousin, Red Adair, if you've ever heard that name. Well, I thought he'd at least be more famous in Texas because he's basically one of the people who figured out or set up the company to put out oil well fires. They actually even made a movie about him with John Wayne called Hellfighters back in the 70s, I think. And he's supposed to be a distant cousin of mine.
Well, I'm a Texas transplant from Missouri, but I have been here since 95. Unfortunately, I didn't spend any time on any oil rigs. So,
okay, well, somehow it's more famous that I remember when I was studying abroad and I had taken a trip to Athens, and literally the hostel I was in, they asked me any relation to Red Adair, and yeah, so random person in Greece knows it. You should too. Or you need to become old enough to still enjoy watching John Wayne films.
That's fair. All right. Thanks, Greg. 1999 from Billdozer. On Netflix, there's a doc about infinity. They say something like, if there's a finite amount of matter and combos of that matter, things will repeat, copies of us, etc. Sounds to me like they're taking liberties. Thoughts?
If you have an infinite amount of time and a finite number of things that can be sorted in a finite number of ways, and all possibilities can exist, then all possibilities will eventually exist. That is expected. That'll be a mathematical fact. How long you have to wait for that can be absurdly long, but absurdly long is always less than infinity. I haven't watched the Netflix series to see how exactly they put it, but especially if you can have a universe that, say, can repeat itself infinitely, like one of the earlier callers was asking about. If you could really have an infinite number of cycles, then every single possibility will eventually have happened and will happen again an infinite number of times.
Yeah. Then we get into the problem of actual infinities, which are problematic at best. But also, you know, when Bulldozer's asking about them taking liberties, one of these days, not today because we're doing super chats, I've had a conversation with a handful of physicists over the years about my difficulties with string theory and how, from a lay perspective, I don't understand enough to even identify that it's falsifiable or that it makes a claim that isn't similar to defining something into existence, kind of saying we know this and we know this and we're missing this, and so we're going to call it that, and then when we go looking, the math works out. It's like we've found X, and the string theorists are saying, you got an equation, it's like find X, and the string theorists are pointing to it saying there it is, and not much else is kind of where I'm at as a layperson. But
it's as far as I've seen it, it is definitely hella complicated, but there are at least a few places where I've seen string theory have models that don't require basically already knowing the answer and stuffing it into it, but like more naturally helping explain things. In particular, string models of black holes seem to have some interesting advantages over other models. And if string theory is ever going to be quote unquote proven, it might be in realms like that where it shows it's the best game in town for explaining problems.
I have a,
if it's successful.
I just used present tense again. I had a physicist friend, Mark Lowy, and he worked here at University of Texas for a period of time, sharing, had an office down from Weinberg, and he studied under Penrose and wrote one of the quantum mechanics books that was used here. Unfortunately, he died a couple of years ago, and he was so useful and a good friend, and we would just sit around and talk, and he would explain things to me. He always did the geekiest little dinner table science experiments to try and get kids and other people involved and get them to understand everything, a lot of stuff related to optics, but also things related to thermodynamics and stuff like that. He'd carry around a 2-liter bottle full of water with different like weighted belled things of water so that you could show that the changing the pressure would cause them to sink, but increasing the pressure would then cause them to rise again, and all these little things. It's really cool. He was, at the time of his death, working with another physicist who I don't know on an alternate cosmology to Big Bang cosmology, and was very excited that while it was still early in their process, the math for this alternate model was more accurate than the current model in the areas that they'd looked at it. And I was like, I'm sitting here and I have a friend who may be one of the people who overturns the foundation of Big Bang cosmology for a more accurate and more robust scientific model of origins. Or it could turn out to be a bunch of crap. But how cool is it that, at least it's weird how I've been, I don't have the first clue about how to do that. And it's just amazing. I don't know. It's just me rambling. We'll keep going with our super chats. I miss Mark.
Right.
If you haven't, Mark Lowy is somebody worth looking up.
All right. So we got a palindrome coming in money. So $20.02 from Whiskey Spirit Guide. Glad I caught the hang up live. Do aliens exist? Probably. Have they visited us here in Earth? No evidence suggests it. But I do wish they'd come and get me out of here. So long, and thanks for all the fish. You end with a very good phrase, and this also reminds me of an interesting little factoid. So I did my PhD work in Ohio at the Ohio State University, and one of the interesting things about Ohio is the greatest number of American astronauts come from that state, which tells you something about Ohio.
Wait.
The fact that people who live in Ohio, they want to join NASA and just get off this rock.
I have and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to take anything out of there. Every now and then somebody says triggers another memory. I have a magician friend, hi Michael, who recently posted that he no longer does any jokes in his act that make any attempt to mock the place he's at. No matter what the perception is from outside of it, because there are people who genuinely love the fact that they live where they live and are from where they're from and all that stuff. And I'm not judging either way. I think there's good humor to be made in mocking a place. Austin isn't Texas, but we're surrounded by it and we're never going to surrender. I will mock Texas forever. I don't care who's happy that they're here. On the other hand, if I'm doing a show and trying to engage with an audience, I think Michael Kent, by the way, has a great idea that let's meet at the place. Tell me something cool about your city. And to be fair, I have been fortunate to travel all around, and I find something cool and interesting almost everywhere I go. Almost, just not in the middle of Texas where there's nothing.
I have to also give myself extra permission for making fun of Ohio. I'm originally from Michigan, and I'm still
There you go.
bitter about what happened with Toledo.
All right. We have. There you go. Oh, I'll just do this because they're asking me. Yeah, right. $10 from TaylorMade at 28. Matt, do you have a Peruvian rainbow boa? If not, what are thoughts on that beautiful snake? We don't have any rainbow boas. We did have a hatchling rainbow boa that I don't think was Peruvian, although they're gorgeous. Unfortunately, there was we needed to do some treatment for mites, and the baby was too young and too fragile to survive the mite treatment that we were doing on the collection with the reduction in humidity, and it was pretty young. It just failed to thrive. Someday we definitely want to get rainbow boas again. Right now, I think the next snake that is likely to be added to the collection is, I'd say the odds are really good on a berm or probably another house snake, because we want to stick with the potential breeding groups that we've got. But I love rainbow boas, and Arden does too. That unfortunately was her little baby that died, just like the albino Darwin carpet python that we bought from somebody who wasn't a particularly good breeder. Ended up with a prolapse rectum and died a few weeks later.
I actually had to look this up because I've heard of Colombian rainbow boas and Brazilian rainbow boas, and obviously Peru borders both of those countries, so it wouldn't be surprising if there was overlap. I wouldn't be surprised that rainbow boas would exist in Peru, is what I mean to say. But the Colombian rainbow boa and the Brazilian rainbow boa are actually different species. So I don't know if the Peruvian is like a different species or a locale of one of the other two. Yeah, it's really interesting. I asked this person, they didn't respond, and then I spent time Googling, and it seemed like Peruvian rainbow boas are the same as Brazilian, which is Epicrates centria or something like that.
They're all Epicrates centricia.
Well, no, Colombians are Epicrates maurus.
But that's okay. I'm thinking subspecies, not species.
Yeah, but yeah, it's weird. Nobody ever refers to them as Peruvian rainbow boas, so this totally just made my brain explode. I was like, I don't know what snake this person's referring to. But yeah,
I think the Peruvian and the Brazilian are very, very similar. Matter of fact, they're probably only different at the subspecies. But cool. So thanks, TaylorMade. By the way, Arden, am I correct in that a Burmese is probably the next one that would be a completely new?
Well, golly, I sure hope so.
Of course. We, by the way, the last clutch of eggs for 2023, we're pretty sure, unless we get new eggs like within the next week, just hatched. And it's 6 ball pythons. They are all albinos, and 50% of them are yellow belly albinos. So they're slightly brighter, oranger snake. They look like their dad, who we introduced to kids. Halloween trick-or-treaters came by, and we would sit out there, with the snakes in short rotation because it was kind of cool. But it was so awesome to have the kids come up and be, "Oh, is that a real snake? Yeah. Have you ever touched one? No. You want to? No." And then some of them would be like, "Yeah, I think I do."
All right, so we got 10 pounds from Sean Isherwood. Is getting a universe from nothing related to the empty set? I know, for example, that the ordinal 1 is the empty set, or the set of null. Also, the product over null is 1, or the appropriate multiplicative identity. So, in a mathematical formalism, you can start from empty sets and then create the various numbers, but numbers aren't the same thing as things. So I don't think there's a direct one-to-one relationship that you can do it with numbers, therefore you can do it with matter energy. Perhaps, though, the more interesting thing is the bank account that is the entire universe, in that if you were to ask, okay, if the universe really started from absolutely no matter energy, that the total energy content of the universe was zero, and then you ask, well, how much energy is in the universe right now? Our best estimate is that within error, it is zero. So the universe has basically as much income as it has debt that perfectly balances out, just to give a banking analogy. So in a sense, the universe is also still, on average or in total, nothing.
I followed some of that. Good with some of that. $10 from Larry Fishman. Matt, that wasn't a debate. It was a cry for help. How you made it through the pi and phi thing is beyond me. That, apart from the fact, I want a copy of that video. And it's one of the reasons why I'm glad the debate is still up there. It's why I'm willing to share it. For those who haven't seen it, in the opening 13-minute presentation by my opponent, it's a video that he's talking over. And it appears to be like a coffee table that has been painted with a diagram and color-coded with a ring of numbers around it. And he explains the first X digits of pi and phi and where there's regularity. And at these ordinals, you get zeros that are buffeted by particular numbers. And then he takes another kind of cross-shaped thing and puts it on top of that one and another one on top of that one, so that now you have extra dials on this, and you turn one of them 90 degrees counterclockwise, and one of them you turn 180 degrees, and then you end up at each of the zeros with, like, it's now flanked by 2 copies and then 4 copies of the same digit. And at the end of it, it is all, and this demonstrates that it can't be coincidence, which means it must be design. As I mentioned in the debate review that I posted just before we went live, I was reminded of Darren Aronofsky's first film called Pi, where a Jewish man gets into, or somebody gets into the Jewish Kabbalah and becomes obsessed with pi to the point where they're trying to predict the stock market and do everything else, and it just leads into madness. It's an incredible first film, and it came out in like 98, I think, and it's a lot of movies are forgettable. That one's not forgettable to me. Mm-hmm. And it changed my outlook on when I'm talking to a person like that, because I'm fascinated by the fact that they have a hyperactive pattern recognition thing. Not that they're necessarily wrong about whatever the pattern is, but once again, just like they're not necessarily wrong about what the shape of the rock is, they're wrong about the inferences that they make and the connections that they make to lead to, therefore, Noah's Ark. Or these numbers say this, therefore, there must be a God.
All right, we got $9.99 from Tess.
Well, see,
I did not do that, but I'm happy it happened.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Tess. Appreciate it. $4.99 from Marin Demarin. A fellow physics major told me Jesus could walk through walls because he was in another dimension, a la Flatlands. I'd love to hear your reaction. Fair?
Well, that's at least better than other things I've heard. I'll give you, maybe I shouldn't say it a favorite, but one that really just caused both me and Lawrence Krauss when he reviewed it. So there was a book called The Physics of Christianity. I'm forgetting the author's name all of a sudden. Frank Tipler. And he tried explaining all the miracles of Jesus in terms of modern physics. And in particular, Jesus basically was resurrected into a body of pure neutrinos, which is then, of course, why he could pass through walls, because neutrinos don't do anything with the electromagnetic interaction. So just passing through walls is no trouble at all. And the way Krauss put it in his book review is, I would call this nonsense, but that'd be an insult to nonsense. But Jesus being a higher dimensional being, just trying to think what some of the other implications would be, because now I just want to figure out how he could test about that idea. I mean, it could explain where he gets all those loaves and fishes if he's basically reaching into a TARDIS behind him.
Now, see, now when you put it that way, all of a sudden it's way more interesting to me. And where
remember,
I was just
all religious problems can be solved with the phrase "wibbly wobbly, timey wimey."
That's fair. Just add another dimension and it explains everything. $10 from PhD Tony. I think it's the religious mindset. You just choose what you want to be true and ignore any contrary evidence. And that strength of faith makes you a good person. They just apply to everything. You're not entirely, I don't entirely disagree, Tony. But one of the things is that, and you'll hear this from Christians a lot. They're not choosing what they want to be true. I'd much rather that there wasn't a God who was going to judge me for my sexual thoughts. I'd much rather, do this and this, but I need to live righteous. We have a hierarchy of beliefs, and we have a hierarchy of desires as well. And it's that they desire an afterlife. They desire someone who cares about them when nobody else does. They desire not being alone more than they desire their more base things. So it's not just about picking what they want. It's that they specifically want, for example, my kind of unconventional Muslim friend, debate opponent, Isa, I think that he wants order. He wants structure. And religion often provides structure. And he also wants a better world. And it matters less whether something is true, in some cases, to him, than whether it might be effective at bringing about a better world. Can he change the Muslim world so that it is better? Is that easier to do as a liberal, progressive Muslim or as an atheist? And to be fair, he could be right that it's much easier to soften it. And the liberal and moderate Christians could be right that, their gay-friendly church is a better way to take down Christianity than anything I've ever done. And at the end of the day, I can only still talk about things in the way that I understand them, in the way that I care about them.
And just to also add in that it's not simply the religious that have the desire to have things that they want to be true and do everything they can to enforce it. This is true for everyone except for me, who's perfect.
Yes. And I'll vouch for Aaron as well.
All right. So we got $20 from Nathan Poljak, or is that Polyak? Every time I see a J, I'm never sure which language it might be coming from. But we'll go with Poljak for now. Finally landed my dream job as a UI designer for a video game company. I'm celebrating by supporting you and the mission, Matt. Thank you for helping me out of religion. If you have a goal in life, never stop working for it. Awesome stuff, Nathan. And
great
UI for video game company. So if that's the case, if I don't like the next Call of Duty, I'm going to blame you.
Wait,
and if I do like it, that means also I'm playing video games again.
you just get to pick whichever company and game you want and still blame Nathan for it?
He doesn't say which company, so I think I'm at liberty to blame him as I see.
Sweet. $10 for Dante Verona. Hey, man. And just like that, I got my ticket to DebateCon 4 in Irving, Texas to see Matt and Aron Ra. Hell yeah. Hey, man, I can't wait to see you again. Yeah, I wasn't originally going to be able to go to this. I was supposed to be, holy crap, I forgot to do a video. Man, Diesel, I'm sorry. I will try and get it done. Anyway, I was supposed to be in another thing. Unfortunately, my health made me cancel all, travel, flight, things like that for the rest of the year. This one is just driving distance and I can stay at a friend's. So I went ahead and agreed to do it. So looking forward to seeing you.
All right. So we got $9.99 from DJ. I'm just learning about this. What is wrong with the position that something doesn't exist until proven true? I've heard you say that if one denies the existence of God, the burden of proof falls on them. So seems like something's a little bit lost in translation here, in that, at least for me, I wouldn't say something doesn't exist unless it's proven true. It's that I wouldn't say I can't assert that it is true without good justification for it. It would be a strange thing for me to say black swans do not exist until they're proven to exist, and then they pop into existence at the moment I look in the right place. Matt, you might have more to say about this. I think there's some background here I'm missing.
Well, anybody who makes a positive claim, and by that you could say there are no black swans, that's still a positive claim. The fact that the claim is ultimately negative is not the point. If you're making a claim about the way the universe is, you have adopted a position that carries with it a burden of proof. So if you want to say God exists, you now have adopted a burden of proof. And similarly, if you want to say God does not exist, you've also adopted a burden of proof. What you can say is, I have no good reason to think that God exists. I am not aware of any black swans. If your position is that there are black swans, you need to actually, produce them and demonstrate them, things like that. You have to, whatever your position is, if you're asserting it, now you don't owe anybody an explanation. You can just say, I'm not going to prove it to you. That's fine. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about where the burden rests, and the burden rests on the claimant. And it doesn't matter if you're claiming God exists or God doesn't exist. If you've made the claim, you've adopted a burden, which you are free to ignore. But, don't expect that you convinced anybody or made an impact. It's like saying, I found a rock that looks like a heart, therefore Noah's Ark. Okay. That's that's not even an attempt at demonstrating the burden of proof. But if you think it is, what can I say? $10 from Jacob Hernandez. Thank you, Matt, Dr. Adair, Arden, and all the mods for the show. Thank you for helping me come to skepticism and secular humanism. Keep fighting the good fight. We love you all and live well. Thank you, Jacob. That's very, very nice. Whoops. I clicked the wrong thing. There we go.
Okay, so we got $13.99 Canadian from Art Starling. I am 12 years in. I remember Matt when he was large.
Well, let's just say larger. I some would argue I'm still large, just not as large, but yeah. I also remember me when I was large. I also remember me before I had a triple bypass and any number of things. But thank you for the years and years of attention and support. $10 from Monkey at Typewriter. Great show, gents, mods, screeners, and Arden, the producer par excellence. Yes. Are we doing coins? If so, Dr. Adair, is there a thing you know that regularly blows your mind?
Regularly blows my mind. Probably the thing that has blown my mind the most in recent memory was the formation of the eukaryotic cell. Because the leading hypothesis for how that happened, and basically how we got the mitochondrion inside such a cell, is basically you had two different cells living separately, one trying to consume the other, and instead of digesting the mitochondrion, absorbing it and then becoming a much more powerful entity. That's like me going to McDonald's, eating a cheeseburger, and getting cow superpowers, rather than just digesting it like normal. The fact that that happened and was necessary for advanced life to exist on this planet, because we needed eukaryotic life to get these big complicated organisms. That's the thing that I look at and just wonder, holy cow, that's some amazing stuff. And does that also explain why advanced life be rare in the universe? Is this an extraordinarily improbable thing and we just got stupid lucky because there's just enough rolls of the dice in the universe? Or is there some other mechanism that makes it so cells don't always just digest each other? That I just look at and I'm like, wow, there's some fascinating stuff happening here. It's like that biology thing is like a real science.
Yeah. Boom. There's the next one.
All right, so we got $10 from GB. What exactly is meant when physics astronomy describes states of matter beyond plasma? Bose-Einstein, fermionic, Riden molecules, etc. What is it? And how do they know it's matter? Well, in science, everything matters. Okay, bad pun. I'll come up with some worse ones as we go on. So Bose-Einstein condensate isn't actually beyond plasma. It's really an even different state than what we might even call the other state. So when we talk about the states of matter like solid, liquid, gas, plasma, the way that we currently define it in physics is that you are changing state of matter when you are adding energy to that material and its temperature doesn't increase. So the interesting thing is, like, when you have like a chunk of ice and you're melting it into liquid water, when you're pumping heat into that ice so it turns to liquid, the ice is going from 0 degrees Celsius ice to 0 degrees Celsius liquid water. So you're adding in heat, but the temperature didn't change. And vice versa. If you are cooling water to turn into ice, it goes from 0 degree water to 0 degree ice. And then the temperature starts going down for that chunk of ice. So when we are pumping in heat and we're not seeing that temperature change, that's how we identify states of matter changes. But when you get things like Bose-Einstein condensates, for example, this is often used in like extremely cold environments with basically all the wonderful world of the quantum mechanics coming into a larger substance, as one way to put it. And so Bose or bosons are a kind of particle where you can have multiple bosons taking up the same place in space. Light is the most common boson you deal with. Fermions are the opposite in that they do care about their position, that you can't have multiple fermions in the same location, but you could have multiple fermions in combination act like a boson, which obviously makes all sorts of other weird possibilities, which I think is a part of the Bose-Einstein condensate, but that's a part of condensed matter physics that I have not sufficiently studied to talk about with confidence.
All right. This is, let's be clear. If you get your super chat in while I'm reading this next one, I will read that as well. But once I get to the end of the list, I need to wrap the show up. And if there are super chats that come in during my wrap up, I'll either try to read them real quick in the closing thing, or they'll just have to wait for another time, or you won't have to get them in. But what appears to be the last one, $10 from the Ratsmith. I'm still riding the high of Matt walking out of the nonsense debate with Howard Stirrup. I appreciate that. I know there were people in the chat who were basically suggesting, yeah, you should leave. And I talked a little bit about it in the debate review that I posted earlier today. I don't need to go into it in detail, and I don't feel any need to mock Howard at all. I made one big mistake, and that was when I was trying to just say, hey, this debate's over, I'm leaving, and he kept interrupting. I got irritated, and I also said, you need help. That was the mistake. It's not my job to psychoanalyze anybody or tell them that they need medical help or professional help. It's irresponsible, and I regret actually saying that. It doesn't matter that it was in the heat of the moment. It doesn't matter that it may have been accurate. That's not what the debate's about. Just like he might be right and I'm a terrible skeptic. But all right. As a reminder, tomorrow on the Transatlantic Call-In Show, Arden Hart and Josie Caballero, 2 p.m. Central, right here on the line. Jimmy and I will be on the Sunday show, 2 p.m. Central as well this Sunday. Forrest will be hosting Skeptalk on Monday. Tuesday will be Dying Out Loud with Dave Warnock and Footless Joe. Next week's Hang Up, I will be joined by Eve Was Framed. If you didn't get your super chats in, well, you missed out, because now I got to wrap up. First of all, don't forget about the other shows that are here. Second of all, thank you so much, Aaron. You got to come back and I don't know. I have so many questions that we're just never going to get to, but
I can answer them very quickly. So 7, pi, blue, and hippopotamus. I think that answers all your questions.
You left out 42, but maybe I'm just geeky.
Oh, that was a given. That was, come on, everyone knows that one.
So here we go. Let me wrap this up. To bookend the show, am I straight? Pretty much. I might be bi or pan, but I don't feel like I've earned any of those labels. I have too many queer friends who've been bullied and assaulted on behalf of those labels. They're a badge of honor that they pick up and carry. I don't feel like I did anything to get that. But if I were gay, I'd have zero problem saying it. It's bizarre to me that so many people seem to think I'm afraid or ashamed to acknowledge some aspect of my sexuality when the only reason they're asking this is because they know that my partner is trans. Elon Musk just claimed that cis is a slur and a slur for heterosexuals, proving once again, as if we need any proof, that Elon Musk is a fucking idiot. Because if cis were an insult to anybody, it would be an insult to cis people, not heterosexual people. There are plenty of cis people who are gay, bi, pan, asexual, and countless other categories that aren't heterosexual. An insult to someone who is heterosexual might be to say, you're gay, bi, pan, ace, or something else. But that only works if the target of the attempted insult finds those claims to be insulting. Offense is taken, not given. And I don't. You're gay, homie. Okay, so what? I also genuinely don't care what label fits me. I'm attracted to the people I'm attracted to, and I'm not attracted to the people I'm not attracted to. I'm sorry if I'm not attracted to you and it offended you. My personal take on this is that it's only useful. My personal take on gender is only useful to others in that it might change their perspective on the subject in a broad way, not on their perception of whether or not they're gay. So somebody asked, what if this caller from earlier today was genuinely confused? Well, I addressed that when I told them that they need to sort this out. But the labels aren't important. Concepts are. If you think I'm gay, okay. If you think I'm straight, okay. If you think I'm bi or pan, okay. I genuinely don't care. If you think calling into the show to try to question my sexuality is some sort of gotcha, you're beyond foolish. I've had great relationships with women, cis and trans, and no romantic relationship with men, cis or trans, that I know of. I haven't ruled it out, but it doesn't interest me, but I don't really care. I've got a great partner who I love, and it genuinely doesn't matter what their gender is. And I'm so happy that your attempts to troll me only make me happier. I really wish that the trolls could get over their misogyny, their homophobia, and their fears to actually find someone who makes them as happy as I am. I've never felt the need to mock someone's sexuality or even ask about it. I've also never asked about their genitals or their chromosomes. I'm also more likely to ask about their wisdom teeth, even though that might be a little too intrusive. You like who you like. You're attracted to what you're attracted to. And if you can have whatever deal breaker you want, but maybe, just maybe, if you start by getting to know a person for who they are before you decide if you like them, you'd find that you have far less time to mock the people who've actually done this. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. There's a bunch of pages. Thanks to our crew. Thanks to the mods. Thanks to everybody who tuned in tonight. Thanks for everybody who called in, whether I disagreed with you or not, whether I called you a pedantic motherfucker or not.